All right, the Public Safety Committee will now come to order. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderman Oldenburg,
Present.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard,
Here.
Alderwoman Keys,
Here, present.
Alderwoman Velasquez, Alderwoman Sanye,
Present.
Alderman Aldridge, Chair Narayan.
Here.
Alderwoman Velasquez, we have 6 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. And with that, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of Thursday, June 29th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by the Alderman from the 11th, seconded by the Alderman from the 10th. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Oldenburg,
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Keys,
Aye.
Alderwoman Velasquez, Alderwoman Sanye,
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge,
Aye.
Chair Narayan,
Aye.
Alderwoman Velasquez, we have 6 aye votes.
All right, with that, we've sustained the motion and approved the minutes. We'll move on to board bills for review. The Alderman from the 14th reached out to me and let me know that he has a personal issue, and he requested that we take up his bill first because he's going to have to leave, I guess, may have to leave. So I told him we could take it up in that order. So we're gonna start with Board Bill 82. Alderman from the 14th, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for accommodating. I'm trying to make sure I can stick around, but just in case if I do have to leave, I want to make sure I present this. I know we also have a very other important bill right after this, so I'm going to do my best to stay and be part of the conversation and vote on both of them. But thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Today, I come in front of you via Zoom to present to you Board Bill 82. Board Bill 82 is the Right to Know Act. It is similar legislation that has been passed in New York City. There's 2 main components to Board Bill 82. And one is identification from police officers when they're enacting with a civilian, and also the consent to search. For me, the premise of this bill is making sure that not only our police department is being transparent, not saying that they are, but just making sure that there's a layer of transparency. But I think what's also really important is for citizens to know their rights. So the first part of it is the identification part. So anytime a officer is interacting with a civilian, they would need to provide them with a business card. And the things that would need to be on that business card that trying to put in ordinance and a lot of these things that is actually in the legislation. I met with the chief of police. They have very similar wording in their policy. Met with the chief because the policy isn't online. So wanted to make sure any piece of legislation that we pass that we're working in tandem with law enforcement, with also making sure that we are doing things so our citizens and constituents know their rights. So the identification part would be a business card where the officer name, rank, badge number, email would have to be ideally on the front, and then on the back side would be the civilian oversight board, contact number and information. So if during an interaction with a civilian and law enforcement, if a civilian wanted to make a complaint or even make a compliment, they could be able to have the civilian oversight number. I know that is a piece of legislation that we've passed, not myself, but have got done at this board, has been in the works for a very long time, especially after the death of Ferguson, or the death of Mike Brown during Ferguson. It reactivated a lot of people who really wanted the COB. So the COB would be on the backside of that card. And again, this would be when officers are having interaction with civilians. Now, there is some exemptions where this card would not necessarily need to be presented. And on page 4, lay out some of those exemptions. Also on page 2 in the consent search part, a few of those exemptions, if an officer is providing a arrest or a summons, then the card would not need to be provided. If the officer have probable cause or suspicion of activity, then the card also would not need to be provided. If an officer is under is on duty and they're like doing an investigation, they would not need to provide a card. Undercover, I'm gonna say if an officer is undercover, they would not need to provide a card. If they see that the person is trying to destroy evidence or flee from the scene or harm somebody else, they would not need to provide a card. These would be very minor infractions where if an officer is approaching somebody or if they pulled them over because they was potentially running a red light, they would need to provide their business card with their name, information, badge number, and the COB information on the back. The second part of the bill is a consent search. And I think that's really the important one, is, again, making sure that people know their rights. So the consent search would only take place, again, if there's like not probable cause, if there is not suspicion of the individual trying to cause harm to somebody else or themselves, destroy evidence. This would be more if an officer is having a conversation with somebody and they happen to see either they have a bag and they want to search it. They would have to give the individual their rights to say, hey, I would like to provide a consensual search to look in your bag. You have the right to either deny that search, or you have the right to allow me to search your bag or your personal belonging or your property, either vehicle or home. Any point during that consent search, the individual would have the ability to continue to allow the officer to search or to revoke their consent search and say, I don't feel that I want to continue the search. And again, there's also some exemptions because as I've talked with the police department and even earlier today, I spoke with Jane Duker, who's a lobbyist for the Police Association. The goal of the bill is trying to make sure that we put some transparency out there and people know their rights, but at the same time, not trying to tie the hands of law enforcement from doing the duties that they need to do. This is legislation that has passed in New York City. It has been successful. As we are continuing to grow trust with our law enforcement and a new chief, which I think we all have faith in, we want to also ensure that residents have certain rights that they know about when it comes to having a consensual search, as well as getting identification from a police officer when they're having a conversation. I think when those conversations happen, it is a great way to also de-escalate a situation by an officer coming up to an individual, letting them know who they are. Here's my badge number. Here's a way you can contact me, as well as the COB on the opposite end. In the legislation, we are asking the department, and I think we're giving them enough time to be able to implement this legislation. So for as a consent search for the department to come up with policies and procedures, in the legislation is 90 days. With meeting with the chief, myself, and Lou Galley, who works for the board. Again, a lot of the things that are already in the legislation in front of us is within their policy. So what we're trying to want to do to accomplish here is make sure that it's a city ordinance. So regardless, whoever the chief is, that this is something that we continue to follow. So the consent search, we're giving the department 90 days, really at their discretion to come up with that policy look like in a written form that can also be shown to the public. And if this bill were to pass the full board meeting, the effective bill would not go into effect to 180 days. Again, to make sure that law enforcement have the business cards ready, the tools necessary to be able to, when having conversations, identifying themselves with the public, they got the resources for the business cards, as well as have a policy down for the consent search. If they do not have business cards, that is also in the legislation where they can provide their written name, badge number, and then the COB on some type of piece of paper and give to an individual, as well as it can be orally given to an individual. If a minor is in the mix of a conversation with law enforcement, they also can give that card to a minor if a guardian or responsible elder is on scene with that minor, there to give the card to the guardian or the parent of the minor. And I believe that is all right now, and we'll open it up to any comments and questions.
Thank you for that, Alderman. Just a quick housekeeping issue. It appears, and I don't know if STL TV or anyone else can do anything about this, but our 7th committee member, Alderwoman Velasquez, is trying to join the meeting from Puerto Rico, but she's being told that she cannot join from Puerto Rico. I don't know if there's
I don't know if there's much I can do about that right now. Once the meeting started, some settings are hard to change. I never anticipated anybody actually trying to join from other countries.
Yeah.
We had some problems with the Board of Public Service. We were getting Zoom bombed from Africa. So I just blocked it. So it's just USA, Canada, and Mexico.
Okay.
I didn't think Puerto Rico being out of that area. I figured that'd be
Sure.
included.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I understand that. And then Alderman from the 2nd, were you in discussions with Chief Tracy?
Yeah, he's also having trouble joining. So I don't know if someone can shoot him a link that ensures his access. I think testimony from him and any other guest who signed up is probably pretty important.
You all are aware that Puerto Rico is part of the US, right?
It's a protectorate. Yes.
Territory. So clerk or
It might be unrelated.
We can shoot a link, a working link to Chief Tracy's email.
So yeah, with that, I guess I will open it up to the committee for any discussion. We'll circle back certainly to hear from the chief when he gets on. I know that there's also some public comment here, but first I'll just go down the list of the committee to see if the committee has any questions of the sponsor. I'll start with Alderman Oldenburg.
Sure. I think there's also a representative. Did you want to go through the committee members first, Chairman, and then circle back to any?
Yeah, we're going to circle back because my hope is that Chief Tracy jumps on here, and then we'll also hear from him then, and then we'll hear from members of the public, including I know that there's at least a member from the POA here, and I'm not sure who else is going to be testifying, who else is signed up to testify, but I see there are quite a few participants, and so the clerk will let me know at that time, I'm sure. But yeah, please proceed, Alderman, for the second, with any questions you have for the sponsor.
I do. Thank you, Alderman from the 14th, for presenting this today. I do have several questions and hopefully a discussion jumping off point, but a piece of legislation involving the parameters that are in this would typically include a very broad and lengthy discussion, much like we're seeing with Board Bill 29, something that takes more than just a week or 6 days to solicit a full community discussion on. What stakeholders prior to filing this bill did you reach out to and work with in the drafting of this bill? I know you met with the chief Monday, but you suspended the rules and introduced this bill on Friday. So I'm just curious if, besides the chief or the police officers union, the mayor's office, the public at large, what any, if all stakeholders were consulted and had a hand in drafting this?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. I would say first to start off, conversations, even though this bill is just brought forward to us last week, suspending the rules and bringing it forward today in front of the committee. I would say when it comes to transparency and how to ensure that we build stronger relationships in communities when it comes to police, have been a ongoing conversation. This hasn't been anything new. These have been cries and conversations of the community trying to figure out, like I said, if it's been since Ferguson or beyond that, how do we put measures in place that ensures that there's transparency within our police department, that people have the information to know their rights. So I would say this has been a long-going conversation that I've been part of either at this board or way before the board. People that I've talked to about this legislation was the chief of police himself and his executive secretary. We met Monday and with meeting with the chief, I'm sure he'll be on to speak here shortly. The conversation was he wasn't against the concept. Actually, when it comes to identification and consent to search, it's actually a lot of it is in their policy. The issue is we wasn't able to find their policy online because it's not like St. Louis County. So myself and Lou Galley, who is our legal person here who helped us write bills, met with him to make sure that what we're doing doesn't kind of tie the hands of law enforcement, but also ensure that the community are educated on their rights and know when it comes to consent searches, the rights that they have around that. Also, last week, I had conversations with Jane Duker, who's a lobbyist for the Police Association, as she reached out to me and seen the bill, and talked with her today about, which I know Mr. Joe will also be talking here shortly, their concerns of the written portion of it, not trying to make sure that police officers have too much documentation when it comes to them developing a policy when it comes to what that looks like as a written aspect, not again against the idea of identification cards and making sure people have their consent search rights, but what that may look like for officers if they're doing a 4-page filing process, which I told him that is not the goal here. The goal is to, bring transparency and make sure people know their rights. And then outside of that, I've talked to people in the community. I've talked with people with organizations, either Action St. Louis, individuals who have been advocating for transparency when it comes to our police department in general. I talked to my neighbors about it, with being their alderperson, let them know this is coming forward. I also have put it out there in a newsletter to let them know that this is something that I'm working on filing to bring forward. So I've talked to community members, I've talked to law enforcement, I've talked to pastors, and I've talked to people that actually are boots on the ground. When we talk a lot about legislation, I feel like we talk about it from a very space and cloud sometimes, but forget about the people who are actually doing the work in the community to make sure the legislation that we pass can be something that not just works for the community, but to make sure that stakeholders can get with this so that they can support the legislation, but also ensure that they are part of those conversations.
I just didn't know, has there been a rash of recent complaints around consent questioning, around probable cause issues? I would think our watchdog media would have been reporting that. I would have thought we'd see potentially protests or town hall meetings. I just haven't seen a metric or a data point that has risen to say this is a problem and that isn't already being addressed with policies and procedures within the police department. Do you know if this is a current policy? I mean, I would imagine the Justice Department would be investigating St. Louis if it was somehow illegally pursuing its probable cause and consent to search issues. So I don't know if there's an internal issue that you're aware of. I'm just trying to get at the reasoning and the cram down what feels like in a very short time period for this piece of legislation.
Yeah, I would say a lot of times the problem is we're so reactionary. We see stuff on the news and we feel like, we need to bring legislation very quickly, which with all due respect, to other pieces of legislation, I feel like a lot of times instead of being proactive, we are being reactionary to what we see on the news and try to pass legislation all of a sudden. What I'm trying to do is get above the curve. And if you go back to And it is a new day. We got a new chief and everything. But if you go back to the Ferguson days, there has been issues. And I wouldn't even just say Ferguson in present day, as I've talked to people in my side of town where they've asked for officer's name and badge and didn't get that. And we're talking with the chief. I know that is his strong policy that he is requiring all officers to do such thing. I think what we're trying to do is codify it into law as an ordinance here, following in place what the practice and procedures is that the police department already has around these situations. So when it comes to identification, they have very similar language that the officers must introduce themselves when it comes to civilians. I think taking it a step further with putting the civilian oversight board and people knowing that if a situation were to occur, not saying that they are, but if a situation were to occur and a citizen feel like that they were mishandled or that their rights was violated, that this board set up an oversight board to not have people feel like that they're going to internal affairs and that complaint may not go nowhere, as well as the consent searches. I've been in conversations as the legislation has been moving, talking to folks about how they felt like their stuff has been searched by law enforcement. Again, not under this administration of the new chief, but have been searched when they wasn't illegally doing anything, or again, under probable cause or suspicion of probable cause. In the language, there is a lot of exemptions where law enforcement wouldn't necessarily do the consent search. So going back to your point, no, this hasn't been out there in the media recently. It has been in the past, but for me, it's about taking a proactive approach and not reactionary approach of things that are just out there. We now must act on it. How do we get above the curve to also let the public know that we care about their rights, that we want to make sure that, we talk about transparency, not just within this body, but in other entities. And as a board of aldermen, we have the ability to pass laws and ordinances that dictate different departments, from the police department to the buildings division. We're doing short-term rentals. I know the excise bill is in your committee, that we can change certain process to make them more up to the 21st century. But again, making sure that the public know that our departments are transparent. And I think when it comes to policing, that is it's a different department than many others, as we've experienced problems in the past with certain communities and law enforcement. So it's about, in my opinion, a tool that we can use to help build trust and again, get on the proactive side so we don't have to see a protest. And then when we see a protest, want to then react to what can we do? And instead of waiting, this is a moment where we can act now to kind of ease that burden if something were to happen in the near future.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the civilian oversight board. Do you have the latest data there around any complaints or findings associated with the substance of this bill? I think that might be helpful to know if there have been X number of complaints filed around consent searches, probable cause, and the like, and to see if that entity is working as you envision. And if it is that not the apparatus that I think a citizen, if they feel aggrieved or negatively impacted around consent searches, can go to?
I would say I don't know if that data exists. And I think right now in this legislation, we are asking that the department create that data and that policy and procedure so that we can start tracking how many consent searches happen, how many individuals have made a complaint around consent searches. I think that is the problem now, is it's not out there. And if it is, maybe the chief can speak on it, but it's also
wouldn't the civilian oversight board exist? So wouldn't that information be there if somebody had a complaint? They would be addressing it through that apparatus.
Yeah, it would go from the civilian oversight board, but also that would be something that the department, we're asking them to have written policy on as well, to work tangibly to make sure that that's accurate data. So I know right now we're actually trying to make sure that the civilian oversight board is getting the right tools necessary so that these complaints that they put forward are actually being heard and not just being stalemate. But having that civilian oversight board on the back of the card, I think is, even if it's 5 consent complaints or if it's 500, I think the public should still have the ability to know their rights, that they do have an entity to be able to make complaints about either a consent search or something happened beyond a consent search where they feel like an officer has unlawfully not given them their right to be a citizen, or have violated their right, I should say.
Do you know, does the mayor's office support this legislation?
I've talked with the mayor's office. I actually talked with the chief of staff just recently, and I also talked to their policy person. I don't think they've come out in support or against the legislation, but they are aware of the legislation and they're aware of the committee hearing that's happening today.
Do you have a sense of, and in your conversations with the chief or with the police officer association, that the additional man hours or resources it may attribute to the reporting requirements that you're outlining in this bill? I just worry about, before you answer that, Alderman, if you would, I just worry about an already strained police department that's overworked and understaffed, needing to come off the street in our protection of violent crime, come off the street to file additional and more onerous paperwork, which could add more labor hours. So I'm just concerned if that at all was brought up in your discussion, or if you think that's a concern from either the police officers union or the chief.
So I would say providing a business card to, if they are hopefully walking the beat, which we want more officers actually engaging in the community and not just riding around. I would assume, handing a business card, if they're having a conversation and they're building relationships like I've seen officers do in the Cherokee area, that wouldn't take too much time. And
I'm talking about the reporting though. The business card thing's what it is. That of course doesn't add any more time, but the additional reporting levels that this bill is requiring will have an impact on, I think, the labor resources.
Yeah, I would say, again, we're giving the discretion up to the department to figure out what that policy look like. As I talked to the representative from the police union, that was their concern. They don't want to have a 5-page process where they have to write out. Nobody's looking to, add 5 pages. Right now, our police already track if there's a homicide that happened, if there's a car break-in. Like I told Jane Duke, who works for the police department, this is easy as the department creating a spreadsheet and putting consent searches and putting the check and adding those up. It doesn't sound like the technology, unfortunately, is there. We're not living in the 21st century to make it easy, but we're not trying to take, this legislation isn't intended to hold up officers. What it is intended to do is make sure that when they are interacting with people, which they do pretty often, if it's a car stop or if it's an in-person stop, that they do provide a card. And if it is a consent search, because they may believe that someone has something in their bag, that they're giving people that right. If they're already stopping them, they're already on the street. I don't see how this would take up hours of time of officers if they're already stopping them either in person or via their car or coming to their home and don't have reasonable suspicion to want to search, or the person does not have a warrant, or the officer is not undercover and they say, hey, can I search your spot, your belonging of your properties? If anything, it would, again, I think this is a more of an educational piece bill, not trying to take man hours away from, or time away from police as they are already doing their duty.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll let us get going to other members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, but do hope you circle back maybe after our speakers for additional discussion. But at the moment, I just have, some pretty big concerns here. The mayor and the president's office, in my opinion, have done such a good job recognizing that we need to fully fund the police department, have a strong police department, and have strengthened, quite frankly, the relationship between community and police. And I'd hate to see that kind of ruin with a piece of legislation that maybe is a little impulsive and requires some more discussion in the community, quite frankly. So I have nothing further at the moment, Mr. Chairman. You're on mute, Brett.
Thank you. All right, well, we will move to Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really don't have any questions for the sponsor. I'm definitely waiting and ready to hear from Chief Tracy and the others that are here to speak on that. So I'll yield to that till after we get those presentations.
It looks like, if I'm not mistaken, that Chief Tracy jumped on the call. It looks like, yeah, I'm seeing him now. I think it probably makes sense for us to hear him weigh in on this, and then we'll get back to the committee members on this. I think it'll inform the discussion more to hear from the chief and his thoughts on the matter. So, Chief, if you can hear me out there, please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And, some technical difficulties on this, so my apologies. I hope you can hear me well now. It was not letting me in, no matter trying for 35 minutes, several different computers, different ways to get in. We were able to hear some of the things that was said before. So I don't know which bill you want me to talk about first. Do you want me to talk about the gun bill, or you want to talk right to know?
We are talking about Board Bill 82, the right to know
Right.
bill. We'll certainly want to hear from you on 29, the gun bill as well. But while we have you here, I think it would definitely help to inform the committee members if we heard your side of the story here. I have every reason to believe that my colleague from the 14th is honest in his reporting on the conversations, but I definitely want to hear if there's going to be any organizational hurdles and any rollout, anything like that from you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, and my apologies for being late again. And the sponsor and I have spoke earlier this week after it was introduced, and I do have concerns with some of the things that there might be some redundancies and things that we already have in policy, and ensuring that there's mandates in our policy as far as providing our name and also our badge number to anyone that asks. And we do policing fairly and constitutionally. And overall, when I do a review, when I come into a police department, I try to look at if there's patterns and practices that why would we look at a law or an ordinance to legislate some things that are already in policy. And I don't see a lot of illegal or unauthorized searches when it comes to complaints against officers. And then secondly, burdensome and sometimes redundancies. But that being said, we had a great conversation on Monday, and I'm willing to look at everything, but it's certain things I do have concerns with. But I think it's a continued conversation with the sponsor and I, just make it a good look as we delve deeper into it. And I believe we might have a meeting set up again on Monday that we can go over some of our concerns and maybe talk to some of the things that are already in policy that I think is very good that we're following. And then also the Fourth Amendment and how we train our officers and how we do this and how we execute out in the street, and making sure that consent to search and or warrantless exceptions and also searches incidental to arrest or search and seizure, to go over those. It's a very complicated issue, and I think it needs further discussion. And I'm glad the sponsor came in and we sat down. And I didn't hear all the things that the sponsor was talking about, so I hope we're on the same page here. Alderman, but we definitely spoke. It was a great conversation, open communication, and I look forward to meeting again, possibly with the administration and you on Monday or Tuesday of next week at your convenience to discuss further. So that's really what I'm at. I don't want to, it's not to get too much into detail. There are concerns. I'll put that out there. And I think hopefully we can iron out some of these concerns or maybe come to an understanding.
Understood. And I'm trying to balance a couple things here, because I know that we are headed towards a recess here, and I'll inquire of the sponsor a little bit later on that. But Alderman Oldenburg, do you have any questions for the chief or of the sponsor?
No more than what I reflected earlier. I think I was glad the chief had a chance to discuss publicly here and mark his reservations, and that there are concerns, but it sounds like there can be a fluid conversation between the department, the mayor's office, and the sponsor, and that it doesn't need to be a rush for a vote today, unless I'm misunderstanding.
All right, then with that, we'll move to Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
No, I don't have any additional questions for Chief Tracy at the time. Thank you for coming in and speaking with us.
Alderwoman Keys, any questions for Chief Tracy or the sponsor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I do not have any questions. Hey, Chief, glad to see you. Thank you for being
Glad
here.
to be seen.
Absolutely.
All right, Alderwoman Sunya.
Hi, Chief.
How you doing, Alderwoman?
I'm good. Thank you for coming to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
So my question, I know you kind of mentioned about the concerns about redundancy in policy. But if this is a policy already, then it would just be a repeated policy. And if it's not a policy, but it's a policy that we think can lead to transparency and equity and community trust, which are things that I value greatly, and I know many in our community do, and many of our officers do too, then what could be the harm in putting this, in having this in place if it's going to be redundancy? And if it's not in place, then it kind of gives a guide as far as what it could look like.
Yeah, well, I believe in transparency. And one of the things that I'm looking to do that I've done in other departments is to try to make sure that we can publicly put out our special orders and our policies. And I think that should be out to the public, and it should, with minimal redactions, obviously, for tactics and patterns and practices. You want to be careful, but minimal, and get that out to the community so you can see that. Because sometimes and this is not really when I say redundancies, we have good policy in place where that if you ask for a police officers, first of all, we're identified also in uniform. We have body worn cameras. We have recorded where we're at locations. We do have a form for consent to search if it's not an exception or a warrant. There's things that we do, but in this bill right now, there's things in it where it's case scenario based. And should we hand out the card in this? Is there consent to do this? There's so many different things that I don't know. It's not very clear. But what I do know is clear in our policy, which is consistent across all boards in any situation, even traffic stops. If you ask the officer their name and badge number, they're mandated by the chief of police to give it to. It's already been in the policy, and it's something I'm never going to change. It's been policies in other places. And that creates consistency and stops the confusion. And I think that's better. And if a person actually wants to make a complaint or a compliment for a police officer, complaint or a compliment, we have a way to educate them where we have the joint complaint form for the Civilian Oversight Board and the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, or you can make those calls. You can make those calls, and if there's a complaint or compliment against an officer, they have it. And if an officer doesn't give that, and we find out it's not, we'll investigate that. And if that's an instructional thing that someone didn't understand, then we'll fix it. If it's intentional, and then it should be addressed progressively through discipline. And so that is across the whole board. This is carving out pieces And at certain different scenarios where I want to make sure it's clear to our officers and clear to the community, because when you start creating confusion, sometimes that can lead to mistrust. And if you have a consistent policy that's giving you a name, badge number, and a way to make a complaint, it's already there. And that's where I'm trying to do. If you look at the bill, it's going after specific times when and where you should be giving a card, when not to, consent to search. We all have that in our orders, and we definitely have it how we escalate and by case law.
But if your policies are not online and they're not publicly, there's a lot of, we're legislators, we're elected, so I'm sure we're much more educated on what is there or what is in the process. But even in the bills we're discussing, I've had to, use the access that we have as legislators to go ask questions directly because the information is not available online. So to me, this bill, this is about folks who, it's one thing for it to be transparent. It's another thing for someone to be telling you. And I think it could be a good thing for an officer to just, hey, here, this is who I am. Like you said, I've never had an issue with an officer since being elected, which again, that's a very different position than a lot of members in our communities with getting that access or having that information shared. But it is, if that information is not publicly available, in addition to lots of the public just not being aware of what their rights are, which to me is what this bill is getting at, that information is not online, it's not publicly available. So it's not as easy to educate and to make sure that people know that it's accessible and that it's, hey, this is where you can go to go get it. And I know you just got here, so you're going to need time to, work on it and make those things happen. But I think, there's also, do you have a timeline of when your policies will be online? And then also just lifting up like for many of us who do, we all come from different communities. Many people in my community still have concerns about police. And I think some of that will always be there. And I think policies like that, like this, help us build the trust and help us show like, hey, as a city, we want this information to be available. We want you to know. But, even with that being the case, it's not online. Are we supposed to wait until it's online and available and accessible? And do you have a timeline of when maybe policies will be online by?
Okay, I'm ready to go.
Because there's 180 days in this bill, if it were to go in effect, for you all to have time to adjust your policy as well.
Well, and this is what I'm asking. I'm still going to be meeting with the sponsor, and we're going to talk through some of the concerns. There's so many scenarios that you just gave me. I don't know. I think we have to sit down and we're willing to sit down and talk about these things. So you came from so many different directions and scenarios. That's why I want to sit down and have those conversations and continue conversations with the sponsor like we had at the beginning of this week and for next week. And when it comes to putting these things out, yes, I am the new police chief and I'm looking at everything and I'm looking to make changes for the better, for the department, for the community. And we want to make sure that we're building trust. I want to make sure we get there the right way for trust with the community and trust with the officers as well. So that there's a balanced effort that I'm trying to do here. And I'm also making sure that the type of policy that we're putting out, there's about, I don't want to get quoted on this, but there's easily over 1,000 pages of policy. So to go through all that and to make sure that we're redacting right and reading, and as we put it out, we're doing it carefully, we're doing it thoughtfully, and making sure we put it out. I don't have to put the policy out if we choose to do that. I have other people I have to report to check, but that's what I did in my last administration that I worked with, and it went over very well. And I look forward to trying to get the same thing done here. But just give me a timeline. I can release policy in that the whole thing at once. If you wait for over 1,000 pages, then you're going to wait a very long time. I would like to put it out as we go through each section, a part of the policy, and we feel good. We'll just make an announcement. We've released this part of the policy, and the continued policy will be released next. That's how I did it in the last place. Community was very appreciative. The police officers, everybody was in a good place. And I think it made us a better community. And that's where I want to be. I worry about legislating things. I worry about legislating policy. And so I think we can get to a place, and those are the things that I'm going to speak to with the sponsor. And hopefully we can come to an understanding that I think it'll bring us together. And my job is to build the trust in this community between the police and also the community, and because we all won. And I want to make sure that we have an opportunity here. So I don't want to miss out on that. Those are my thoughts. It's very high level. The specifics, I'd really get back in as we dig into it. And I hope when we meet with the sponsor again, we can have more to offer it and more of the specifics.
Yeah, I don't for a second think that your job is easy. And I know that, we've had a chance to have several conversations ourselves. I don't, it's not specific to your job, but I just want to make sure too that we're lifting up, like, we are the legislative body and we do have to respond to our communities and our constituents and make sure that they know that we are doing our job, which is to make sure things that they may think are missing are there, or even to show that we are going above and beyond to be as equitable and understandable, and to make sure that our constituents are as educated as possible, on their rights. And I just know, like, that everybody's not on the same timeline that we're in. And just because things are not in the media or not in articles or not in newsletters, I don't have to read a newsletter to know what's happening in my community, or, honestly, to know what it's like to just move through world without position and without power and without title, and to be like a younger person of color. So I'm just like, lifting that up. I do think your office has worked with us and has been tangible, and we have a lot of conversations to go. But for me, especially because today, and this isn't specific to you, we're discussing multiple bills. So we're like asking a lot of questions, which I get is great around transparency, but there's another bill that we're going to discuss. And so I'm just curious to see if some of the concerns around this bill will be similar to the concerns around the next bill, because in some ways it is about making sure that as we put new things in place, people do feel like to help our city and to make us a safe place to be, that people feel like we're being accessible and we're being safe. And I know that there would be some questions about, like, so you couldn't do the transparency and the know your rights education bill, but you could do, this other type of enforcement. So I just wanted to lift that up, and all of that is not for you. Some of that is just for some of what I heard earlier in the committee as well. But that's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
You're on mute, Brett.
Thank you. One of these days I'll get used to being on Zoom again, I guess. Chief, if you could let me know your thoughts on it. It sounds like with your conversations with Alderman Aldridge, that the officer handing out the card is not at all your concern in this legislation. It's the recording things on the back end. Is that accurate?
No, there are concerns. My concern is that we have something in place already. There's specifics when you hand out the card, when not, but we have a policy that's very good as far as being transparent who you're dealing with. And that officer is mandated to give their name and badge number at any time requested by a citizen in any case scenario. So it covers everything. So there's consistency there. The other one is kind of piecemealed into specific incidents that sometimes can be interpreted different ways. And that's my concern. There's consistency and good policy that we already have in place. So yes, there is a little bit of a concern when you're handing out a card on specific incidents and the interpretation of the individuals are there. If you ask for the name of the officer and the badge number, even on traffic stops or anywhere you want, they're mandated to give it. If they don't, then there's going to be there should be an investigation, and a thorough investigation by my office and the Civilian Oversight Board.
Understood. All right. With that, I guess I'll open it up to members of the public. I know we have Mr. Steiger from the Police Officers Association, and clerk, do we have others signed up for or against? Madam Clerk?
I do know Arnez Bardot is also signed up as well. And there's a message from the chair, I think, for others to speak. How you go about that, raising their hand.
All right. Well, I guess just in the for the sake of time, since we do have Mr. Steiger here and I can see him and he's on. Mr. Steiger, will you raise your right hand and swear in? Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
I do.
All right. Please proceed. We'll give you 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll be brief. My name is Joe Steiger. I'm a retired St. Louis City police officer. I currently work as the business manager for the St. Louis Police Officers Association. I don't want to tie a bunch of your time. I just would like to echo the chief's concerns. I'll yield to his authority on policy, but I agree that much of the issue that was being addressed here is already addressed in policy. It's how the police department operates currently. One of the biggest concerns, I think, is the mandate to the reporting, the way that it's written, the maintaining of the records by the officers themselves. It seems like it needs a little bit more discussion on how we would make that work. It seems like the way it's written, it seems like the officer is the one who's responsible for maintaining those records and keeping the records. So that's a bit of an issue. Again, also we're talking, and I know that Alderman Aldridge already spoke to this, but we do have a concern about manpower when we are down about 275 police officers. So taking people off the street, adding additional paperwork, it does seem it can be burdensome to the men and women who are out here trying to keep the city safe. So there's some current concerns there, and again, concerns simply similar to what the chief has already talked about as far as the policy and the cards. But the police association is happy and open to sitting down and trying to talk through some of those with the members of this committee.
Great. And do any members of the committee have any questions for Mr. Steiger? Just shout out if you do.
You said that you're concerned about the officers being like kind of their workload?
Yes, ma'am.
And because of the reporting section?
Yeah, so I mean, depending on what that looks like I'm not sure that it's not really spelled out in the legislation. If it's a simple checkbox couple thing, it would be something that would be simple to handle. But the way it's written, it appears like they'll be required to write a report anytime that happens, so that it would be taking them out of service, going to the station, writing a report to document that. I mean, that could be time consuming. And it's just not explained well through in the bill that I can see. And I guess, like I said, I know Alderman Aldridge talked about, he's not talking about a 5-page report, but it's really not spelled out in there. So that's kind of the issue. I just want to make sure that if we're doing something like this and we're mandating a report, that it's something that's done simply, and it's not that we don't want to take people off the street to write reports when they should be out on the street trying to stop crime.
Isn't the current reporting covered by cameras? Like covered by body cameras?
Body cameras is part of it, but when an incident occurs, you have to write a police report, like physically go to the station, write a report. There is camera footage available on body cameras, but the way that this is written, it doesn't necessarily define that that's the only way to report it. It sounds to me like, and maybe I'm not reading it correctly, but it sounds to me like the officer would be required to do some sort of report and maintain a record for that.
Yeah, I'll let the sponsor speak to like what's specifically in the bill, even though, I definitely read it and saw through it, but for me, I think part of the police's job to protect and serve people. I think it can be dangerous to consider extra work that makes you equitable and makes you transparent and makes you accessible to consider that extra work. But at the same time, I do think, I know I've heard some of the ideas swung around often about maybe we need folks on our police force who help with some of that, help with some of the other administrative work to free up the time to do this. And to me, what you're saying kind of supports that idea. Like for me, if things like this create extra burdens, then maybe we need to figure out who that should be, because this has to be a part of the public safety conversation. Like we have to talk about how we're going to make sure people know their rights, how we're going to make sure things are accessible. And I don't, for me, that's a part of the job of the police officer. I think it's a part of all our jobs who serve the public in any way to do that as much as possible. I understand what you're saying about, basically it's extra work, but, maybe that's something else for us to think about as far as the structures and whose responsibilities it should be. And I know people keep saying what's in place and what's going, but I can promise you that some of the things that are in place are not reaching everybody. So I also don't think we can ever be like, oh, well, we do this and we do that, so we're good where we are, because I can promise you that that's not the case to many folks in our community, in many places in community, in many ways by my own experiences. But that concludes my questions.
All right, then we'll move to,
Can I just jump in there, Chairman?
sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Is it Jim?
Yes, sir.
Jumping in? Yes, and so I hear what you're saying. If you go to page 5, line 20B, again, with the legislation, we actually are trying our best to, one, make sure that there's transparency, but also give the department a lot of discretion. It says that the department shall develop and implement some type of written document. But as you continue to read on, it also expresses that could be audio or video, any unbiased way, as well as that that type of development of policy wouldn't have to be developed into 90 days. So like I told Jane Duker, I don't, no one is trying to make sure it's a 4-page process, but there should be some type of policy developed at the hands of the chief within 90 days, in my opinion. 3 months is a long time. And then we talk about the bill itself would go into effect 180 days. You're talking even several months. Would give officers in the union the ability to work with the department and to figure out what that policy look like after this is passed. But it goes to also audio, video, and not just necessarily written. I wanted to just point that out because I know that was one of the concerns that Ms. Duker brought up. And like I mentioned to her, that the goal isn't to have a 4-page process. It'd be nice if like the department have a spreadsheet when these different things happen. They can, say it was a stop and it was a consent search, making it more 21st century. Don't know what the department has, and I appreciate meeting with Chief Tracy because like Alderman Sonia said, a lot of this information isn't out there publicly, but I did just want to, as you look at the bill and we continue to talk on page 5, line 20B talks about that development of the policy coming from the department and giving them 90 days to do so.
Thank you.
All right, does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Steiger, or shall we move on? All right, I see Miss Inez Bordeaux here. I'm sure that she is signed up to, well, I guess you don't have to sign up anymore. I'm sure she's interested in speaking on this. So Miss Bordeaux, if you could please raise your hand to swear in.
Right hand, right? Yeah, right.
Yes, ma'am. And do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
Yes.
All right, and you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay. My name is Inez Bordeaux. I am the committee woman of the 3rd Ward. I am an organizer with the Defund, Re-Envision, Transform campaign. I'm an organizer with the Close the Workhouse campaign. And I'm the manager of community collaborations at Arch City Defenders. So what we're talking about today, I have a lot of experience with it as a community organizer that specifically works to politically educate really the Black people in St. Louis and get them civically educated. And I just want to say the very reasons that the chief and the rep from the police union mentioned are the very reasons we need Rasheen's bill, or excuse me, Alderman Aldridge. I'm sorry, it's going to take a minute for me to get used to it. So we know for a fact that police officers do not give their name and badge numbers when requested, especially if it is an adversarial confrontation. We also know that just because it's in the policy doesn't mean that police officers are doing it or supposed to do it. And because we, the public, have no access to know if I file a complaint against a police officer, like what happens to it. We don't get return phone calls. The Civilian Oversight Board is not doing a whole lot right now. There is no mechanism for accountability. And this is literally why I do the work to defund the police, because the police cannot be reformed, because every ounce of transparency and accountability that we ask for, they fight against it. We just listened to 2 people explain why it is onerous, why it is a burden for them to have to take time out of their day to give a business card to someone that they are interacting with, why it is burdensome to check a box to say we did a consenting search on this person and be done with it. Just because something is policy doesn't mean that they're doing it. And as a person who is Black and lives in St. Louis and organizes Black people and builds community with Black people and talks to Black people, the Black people who live in the, not so great neighborhoods who are consistently surveilled and harassed and targeted by police, since I have everyday conversations with those people, I know that the police officers are not doing what they're supposed to do. And we can just look at things that we do know about that have come out in the media over the last couple of years that I'm sure are against policies. We've seen the racist text messages, passed back and forth through multiple members of, the police department. I'm sure that's against policy. We just settled a $5 million lawsuit that was paid with taxpayer dollars because police officers jumped one of their own police officers during a protest, broke his phone and beat him. I am positive that is also against policy.
If you could finish your thought.
Sure, I sure will, no problem. So things are happening and I don't see what is wrong with just a little bit of extra transparency, a little bit of extra accountability. And if you're serious about building trust with the public, you wouldn't fight against this. This is actually the basic bare minimum. And thank you for your time. I'll be back to talk about Board Bill 29.
Well, before you run off here, does anyone have any questions for Ms. Borgo? All right, well, thank you for your testimony. And let's see who else is on the call. I see Mr. T-Dub-O.
Peace, everybody.
Could you, what's your name, sir?
My name is T-Dub-O. I'm a hip-hop artist from St. Louis, Missouri, as the co-founder of Hands Up United, which is an organization that is organized in 38 countries and 38 cities in 3 other countries, including Sierra Leone, Africa, Paris, France, and London, England. I was also one of the advisors of the Obama administration around predatory policing and reform, which had a high specific targeting of the St. Louis region as well.
All right. Well, Mr. T-Dub-O, would you raise your right hand to swear in? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
Absolutely.
All right. You have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
First and foremost, I was born and raised in St. Louis, North City, to be specific. The actual ward of wonderful Alderwoman of Miss Laura Keys. Just to be plain and clear, I have never been asked to consent to a search in my 35 years of life. And I've probably been searched by police officers well over 200 to 300 times. I've had cars stopped illegally, searched illegally. I've been detained illegally from a minor up to an adult. So this is not me speaking on what I've heard of what I've spoken to people about. This is what I've actually experienced. Police officers here in St. Louis, Missouri don't live by the book. A lot of them don't even understand the law that we're asking them to follow. So when we say we have policies in place, most of them don't even understand the fact that those policies are in place, or you have this right or this law is in place. We have the highest recidivism rate in the nation, which means when people get arrested and come out of jail, they go back to jail. So clearly that system doesn't work. We have more police per capita than Manhattan, according to our population and according to the population of Manhattan. So when we hear folks from the police department say there's a police shortage and they don't need more workload, to me, it tickles me because we have more police per capita, according to statistics, than Manhattan, which has 8 million people. So the police officers aren't a problem. Not having enough police officers aren't a problem. Police officers that refuse to be accountable is the problem. A police department that doesn't want to actually keep things in place for these police officers to be accountable is a problem. So when you come on this this panel here and you say you want accountability or you want to build trust with the community, yet you dodge every opportunity to have something in place to make sure that we can hold these officers accountable. We can hold this police department accountable, which is something that we have never seen here in the city of St. Louis, Missouri. That's very worrisome, extremely worrisome. So I'm in extreme support with Alderman Aldridge's bill, because as I said, as a resident here, as somebody that was born and raised here, that has experienced the worst of oppression and predatory tactics that these police departments has to bestow on the community from St. Louis City to St. Louis County, I can tell you that it's absolutely needed. The constituents here in the city absolutely want it. I'm not speaking of the ones such as the alderman here that moved here from Washington, Missouri, who represents Ward 2, Mr. Tom. I'm talking about people that was born and raised here every day to deal with the predatory tactics. 14 years old, I was pushed up against a vacant building and threatened to be dropped off in a rival neighborhood by a detective. I was beaten and handcuffed to a cell by a detective from cursing my grandmother out and defending her. I was threatened to have drugs planted on me, guns planted on me. So again, this is something that's going on every day. And I know you all may not see it because the privilege in your positions, the privilege in your skin color, the privilege in your financial situations may protect you from a lot of these situations. But when you're dealing with an everyday average person walking the streets of St. Louis, I guarantee you every one of them has had a negative and illegal interaction with the police officer once in their life.
Thank you, sir. Does any member of the committee have any questions for Mr. T. Dubbo? Hearing none, thank you for your testimony, sir. And I'm looking, am I missing anyone else?
Ms. Cole looks like in the.
Okay, Ms. Cole. Ms. Cole, we can't see you or hear you. Oh, here we are. Hello. Would you please raise your right hand to be sworn in? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
I affirm.
All right, you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, I was listening to several of the comments and I'm gonna first address the comments I just heard. And I believe it's not true that a lot of, that all police officers do not give their badge number nor their names. I'm pro, you must say I'm pro police officer, but I'm pro community also. And I believe each community have a responsibility to, for the things that they do. They do give their names. Some of them don't, but majority of them does. I believe that writing a long report and taking people off the street is ridiculous. I believe in accountability. I'm a Black person, as you can see. I'm a Black person that their grandson, which is Black, was murdered by another Black. So it's not just a Black or white thing. It's not a community or police officer. It's behavior. And until we deal with the behavior and change the narrative that way, we're gonna constantly have problems. It's always bad apples in every organization. That's from the church to the streets. It's bad apples. Now, I'm gonna speak on behalf of my grandson. My grandson is Isaiah Danford. He was murdered on January the 11th, 2022 with an AR-15 assault gun. 16 rounds was fired at one in a matter of seconds, and 3 of them entered in my body. I'm speaking as my grandson. Now, my Nana is fighting in my behalf for other grandmothers not to feel the pain that she and her mother and my mom and my siblings are feeling, and my daughter constantly feeling. Oh, my cousin attended visual performance art when the gunman came in and killed a fellow classmate and a teacher. My brother, he was a fellow him and his fellow co-worker was employed with Amazon, in which the co-worker was injured and now paralyzed by an individual. Did I hear you say, what's wrong with my brother? He's constantly battling with PTSD. Oh, did I hear you say, what is my Nana doing here today? I'm glad you asked. She is speaking for me because I can't speak. I can't. I'm going to my eternal home. Stop the violence, support the bills, prohibit persons with open carrying weapons and firearms. I don't have a problem with some of the bills. I know some of it needs to be tweaked, but we're gonna have to do something. This is ridiculous. We're gonna have to stand up and make those hard decisions as alderperson and alderwomen. I have been through this. I've been through where my grandsons have stopped, police officers have stopped. Yes, and all of it wasn't a good experience. But for the most, since we have not rectified some of the situations that are going on right now, and I'm not even including the cars, which is a legal weapon.
Ma'am, if you could just finish your thoughts. You're at your time. I don't want to cut you off, but in the spirit of fairness.
Looking at legal weapons, we're also looking at legal weapons far as cars. That's a legal weapon. So until we start implementing and enforcing the laws that are already enforced, just do that. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate those that are standing. Thank you, Alderwoman Shameen, for helping me trying to get through on this call. I appreciate my alderperson, which is Alderwoman Keys. Thank you for your time, Alderman Narayan, and the committee.
Thank you. And does anyone have any any questions for Ms. Cole? All right. Thank you for your testimony. And I'm hearing from STL TV that if we take a brief recess, that they are going to be able to get our 7th committee member onto this, who has been watching it on YouTube because they can't log in, but there's a setting that can apparently be changed if we take a brief recess. I'm waiting for them to be able to tell me how.
I'm not sure where you got that information. That's not correct. I'd have to close the meeting to do that.
Oh.
Like literally close it. Sorry.
All right. Then we're not going to do that. The president of the board has given me misinformation. So then at this point, Alderman from the 14th.
Brent, you got hands in the attendance.
Oh, let me take a look. Okay, it looks like we have Emily and then ML Smith, who would like to discuss if they could be moved over. All right. Emily, I apologize. I don't have a last name there. But if you could take yourself off mute, and are you trying to testify on Board Bill 82?
I am.
And so that's ML Smith. Okay. All right. Ms. Smith, if you could please raise your right hand to be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're going to give is true to the best of your ability?
It is.
All right. You have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to join mostly to listen, but I definitely felt like a voice needs to be added to this conversation. I do not live in the city of St. Louis, just to be transparent. I actually live in University City. However, the work that I do interacts very much with the city of St. Louis. I am the director of 2 organizations myself, but the work specifically I'm talking about is through Freedom Community Center. I am a volunteer with a program called Court Watch STL. And what we do is observe the St. Louis bond hearings that go on a daily basis. I have been doing this for over a year. And in that particular time, I have noticed a lot of things. And I think one of those things pertains to this meeting. It is the fact that we cannot allow our authorities to police themselves. You know, we cannot assume that just because they have this position, that they are automatically going to do the right thing. Specifically in court, it has taken people like me to sit and observe what's going on for our courts to actually, you know, clean their act up a little bit. You know, the judges and the prosecutors, they notice us sitting in the court and they don't do certain things that we noticed in the beginning that they did do. So I believe that there has to be some type of observation and accountability for authorities. And this particular bill that Alderman Aldridge put forward I also got to get out of the, to make sure I meant to say rep, but Alderman Aldridge put forth will allow the citizens to have more say in those people in authority. When the policeman and the chief says, oh, well, they do that already. Yeah, that's not necessarily the case. That's not necessarily tracked. And we don't know that for sure. There have been people who have said, no, when you've asked police their name or their badge number, they have not given it to you. So for citizens to actually have some control in the people who we pay, right, as taxpayers, there should be more of an oversight from the citizenry to make sure that those in authority, like law enforcement, like the court, people in court, that they know that we are here and that there are certain things that they have to answer for. And I don't think, like Inez, that giving someone a business card and making sure that, you know, you introduce yourself, you make sure that you tell them who you are and why they're stopping you. I don't think there's much of an overstep. And again, just leaving that up to the people in charge is not necessarily, has not worked, you know, for that case. That's not necessarily worked. So making changes helps as well. And I want to address one more thing. One of the aldermen, and I can't remember your name, my apologies, early on asked Rep. Alderman Aldridge about why this was needed and were there any complaints filed recently, et cetera. And I just want to make this clear. Just because we have a new mayor, we have a new police chief, whatever new we have does not necessarily mean these institutions have changed automatically. Policing is an institution that was founded in this country centuries ago to do a certain thing. And over that time, for the most part, that's the thing that they do, right? And so I can't even, I like our mayor also, Mayor Jones, but I can't say just because Mayor Jones came into office that our police department completely changed the culture of what policing is. And for that to be the assumption, that's not right. I don't have anything against the new chief. I haven't, you know, known him well or looked into him that much. I assume he's doing an okay job. That's my assumption right now. But just because he entered this office earlier this year or whenever it was, does not mean automatically.
If you could just wrap up your thought,
Okay,
you're
sure.
just past your time here.
Okay, no problem. So I just wanted to say that just because there is a new police chief, a new mayor, et cetera, does not mean the culture of policing has changed. And so whatever our board needs to institute to make sure the citizens of St. Louis have some oversight and can observe and get response from the police department if a new bill is necessary. So that's what I wanted to leave you all with today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And do any members of the committee have any questions for Ms. Smith? All right, hearing none, thank you for your testimony today. And then we had one more individual with their hand up and then it looked like they were frozen. I'm trying to see if I can find them now.
And it looks like we got the Alderwoman from the 6th.
Yeah, it does look like we've been joined by the Alderwoman from the 6th. There's Emily. Okay, I see Emily's back as a panelist. I cannot see you, Emily.
And I apologize, I am trying to figure that out on this Zoom. It just keeps going on and off to be able to get my video and microphone on. There, hold on, there it is. There.
All right, great. And what's your name for the record, ma'am?
Emily Davis.
All right, Ms. Davis, will you please raise your right hand to be sworn in? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
I do.
All right, you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, I would like to simply add some of my experience. I also do not live in the city, but I work in the city and I do a lot of work in the city, particularly in outreach that puts me in contact with the police on a regular basis. I have never, ever had some police officer identify themselves to me. Most of the time, they won't even do it willingly, much less voluntarily. Trying to get a name and a badge number out of someone is very difficult, and it has certainly never happened that they have approached me or anyone I've been with and just offered that information voluntarily. So I think it's important to hear the experiences of people who, whether or not policy is dictating that, are not experiencing that. And for all the policy in the world, as someone else mentioned just briefly a minute ago, culture eats policy for lunch. If the police department has a culture of the way that they treat people and the way that they behave on the street, there is no accountability with just policy. That's the point of adding legislation. Legislation adds accountability. Legislation requires someone else to be in an oversight position. And I think that just demanding that there is a little bit of accountability and transparency out of some very basic things like having to identify yourself, having to ask people for consent to search. Those things are not, they're not things that should be simply dictated by policy. Even if the current chief is now enforcing that policy, he's not going to be here 20 years from now. He won't be the next chief. And that means that those things have to be put in place so that they are a permanent standard and not simply enforced as policy on the whim of whoever is in charge. And also, I think some of the assertions that this is burdensome are ridiculous assertions because, as I said, as the business officer said himself, it's not outlined in a way that dictates that it has to be burdensome. There are some basic requirements, checking a box, having that recorded on video. It's not outlined that it has to be a burdensome process for the police, but simply expecting them to do that is important. But also, I think what's equally important is having that access to the Civilian Oversight Board information on the back of the card, because most people do not know, who to go to file complaints, how to access the Civilian Oversight Board. And so handing that information off to citizens gives them accessibility to be able to make complaints, to be able to participate in the process, which is equally as important. And the only way that they can go make those complaints is having the information on the front of the card about who that officer is and what their badge number is. So I think legislation simply adds a layer of accountability that will require them to do this, which they are not doing now, going forward, and give people another layer of protection where they can complain to another body and have that taken care of regardless of who is in charge of policing.
All right, thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions for Emily? I'm sorry, I forgot your last name.
Davis.
No, for Ms. Davis. Does anyone have any questions? All right, hearing none, thank you for your testimony, Ms. Davis. I do want to recognize that the Alderwoman from the 6th has joined us, and I know she was watching the proceedings but wasn't able to participate. Recognizing that, Alderwoman, do you have any questions for anyone from anywhere along the way at this point?
I do not. I appreciate everybody's patience. We had some technical difficulties with Zoom not recognizing Puerto Rico as part of the U.S. Just want to say that for the record, but no, thank you all. I know this is a really important topic, and I thank the chief and the SLPOA and Inez and the other folks who have joined today to testify on behalf of this legislation.
All right, then Alderman Aldridge, just a couple of quick questions for you before we move forward. So the chief did indicate that that you and him are continuing to, that this is an ongoing discussion. Are you with me, Alderman?
Yeah, are you asking a question or are you just making a comment?
Yes, yes.
Yes, I didn't know the chief would be part of that. I did talk, I'm a transparent person. I talked with Jared Boyd, the mayor's chief of staff, to set a meeting up. It sounds like the chief will be there Monday. So yes.
Okay. And I'm kind of torn here because on the one hand, I do want to recognize the idea that we're going on a recess, and I know that a lot of people are trying to get things kind of across the finish line before that recess. But I do think that this needs to be fleshed out a little bit more to develop the policy so that there's some harmony with the policy in between you and the chief. And I think it sounds like we're going to get there. I just don't see how we do it on the schedule that we're on. So I'm going to leave it to you whether you want to hold a vote on this today, with the knowledge that if we vote on it today, I'll be a no, because I want to make sure that we have harmony there between the police chief's policy and the legislation that we make. So if you want to hold a vote on it, I'll entertain a motion. If you want to hold it, we'll hold it, and it's whatever you want to do. Ball's in your court.
I would say I would want to hold a vote on it today. I believe the bill gives so much discretion for the department within 90 days for them to develop a policy, 90 days. And I know, Alderman, we talked about this yesterday, and I thought you felt it was enough time, as well as the bill wouldn't even go into effect with the Cara procedure process until 180 days. You know, I feel like what we're, you know, I'm glad that, you know, we are having conversations with the chief, but we're talking about things that, as the chief said, is if it's in policy as a legislative body, our role is to ensure that it is also in our policy and ordinance as all the people to ensure that there's transparency. We're talking about a card that they already do with adding COB. That is not in their policy. That's something new. I think as we've been holding meetings around COB, we all want to make sure that our civilian oversight board is being supported and that that entity is there so that there's an independent body. And I think, again, the language that is in the board bill, even when it comes to the consent search, it is giving, and in my past life as an activist, I probably would give this much discretion, right? But there's a lot of discretion given to the department to figure out what that policy looks like, but us as a body letting people know that transparency is important and we're being proactive about it, especially, again, with 90 and 100 days. I don't, you know, I know the chief want to roll it out, and, you know, I fully respect the chief. I think he's doing a good job to the level of him being in the department at the time. But if this is already redundant or some of these things are already in policy and it's giving them that discretion to make sure it is in policy, I don't see how 90 to 180 days would hold up the changes that the board is giving them to make. So with all due respect, Mr. Chair, I would like to take it to the vote today.
All right, understood. And with that, I'll just say, just so that the chief of police is aware, just on the timing that we're likely looking at, I would imagine that Alderman Aldridge is going to try and perfect this week, just because I think most people will be trying to. So if there is any proposed changes, we would, any amendment, anything like that, we would need it to be done before the perfection, which will be tomorrow, I would anticipate. So I'm happy to discuss any changes. That's a fast turnaround, but I'm happy to discuss if there's any specific changes that need to be made. And I guess at this point, I'll entertain a motion from any member of the committee.
But before we make that
before we-
motion, I just have a concern. You know, I'm always concerned when people are trying to rush something through. And I think that more discussion needs to happen around this particular issue. My own personal interactions with the police have been that I could always see the badge and the name, you know, on the police officer's person. So it wasn't like that information was concealed from me. But again, I do have a concern that, you know, maybe we need to bring some more people to the table to have a greater discussion. And I don't ever like when things are rushed. I think that that's how things get missed, how balls get dropped, and some, you know, another perspective could be missed. So that's my concern. You can go ahead and make your motion if you like, but that's just my take on it.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I know I've heard some conversation about like the civilian oversight board process. I don't know if the chief might even be able to answer this, but I feel like from the hearings we had around the civilian oversight board, we also did hear that they were having trouble getting access to some of the complaints that were being filed. Because I feel like part of what has been said here is, you know, you can give your complaints to the police department, but I think we've heard previously that those complaints are not making it to the civilian oversight board.
I can't speak to that. I don't know if the chief is available to weigh in on that. Here he is.
Chairman, yes, I can answer that. This is the first I hear of this, Alderwoman, and if there's any concerns, please, can you bring them to me? And I can deal with the Division of Public Safety and also the Civilian Oversight Board to see if there's any issues. This is, from the time I've been here, I have not had any complaints or actually any concerns that we've been blocking anything that can get to them. So this is the first time I hear this.
Okay, I'm lifting that up, and I'm also saying that putting the civilian oversight board information on the back of the business card that they have to give could also help address that issue because constituents have that entity to contact directly. So that was it. Thank you.
All right, and we certainly will be continuing our ongoing civilian oversight. Yes, Alderman from the 6th.
Yeah, I just want to both thank Alderman Aldridge for putting this bill forward and for all the folks who've testified. And to kind of echo Alderwoman Saulnier's point, I mean, I think it sounds like there is work to be done with this bill, but I think it's important to remember, especially in context of, I think the bill we're about to hear next, Bill 29, and some other issues that folks have concerns about transparency with generally with policing in the city that this fits into that, right? And to have, you know, a series of things that both safeguard transparency, but also have the trust of the people, and that we keep that in mind. So even though it may not be ready to go today, I mean, I think that's something that we all should be considering, that these are all parts and pieces of the puzzle to build trust and also make our city safer.
All right, well, does anyone have anything further?
I guess I'll just close out before I ask for a due pass. Again, I do appreciate everyone who testified today, from the chief to the union to individuals telling their personal stories. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to my committee members for having this discussion. While I understand that it may seem like it's rushed, I know I've at least reached out to every committee member on this committee and talked with you, or attempted to talk with you, and sent out an email early in the week also saying this was coming forward. Please look it over so I can be aware of your concerns so that we can make sure that this is a good product. I think even some of the concerns that the chief had, which I look forward to talking with him again, the biggest concerns is that a lot of this is in policy. And our role, again, I feel like at the board is to just codify what departments have in policy. Again, we're talking about an ID card with an officer name, badge number, phone number, and an email, and then a phone number on the backside to civilian oversight when there's interactions with law enforcement civilians, and letting people know their right when it comes to consent searches. This is, I feel like, a proactive piece of legislation that instead of waiting till something happens and we want to react to it, we are about to go on break and we are in the summertime. And I know we're going to, we are about to hear a bill right after this that is trying to address some of those things. I think while this bill is not the same as that bill, as we do the enforcement, I think it's also important that we do the transparency element and let people know their rights. If 90 and 180 days is a burdensome process, which I don't feel like that time limit is, I feel like this is an opportunity for us to go on the offense, especially as we are about to go into summertime in the areas that I represent. I think this is beneficial legislation that is going to make sure that while we are on break, that these protocols and procedures start to happen so that we do not have to wait to after we come back on break to ensure that transparency and people know their rights. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would like to make a recommendation for a due pass.
All right, there's a motion for a due pass recommendation. Do I hear a second?
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
I'm sorry, who was the one who moved that?
I believe Alderman Aldridge moved.
Alderman Oldenburg,
No.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Keys,
Present.
Alderwoman Velazquez,
You're on mute, Alderwoman.
Aye, thank you.
Alderwoman Sanye,
Aye, and can I be added as a co-sponsor?
noted. Alderman Aldridge,
Aye.
Chair Narayan,
No.
we have one present, 4 ayes, 2 noes.
All right, with that, you've sustained the motion and this is passed out of public safety with a due pass recommendation. And we will take up board bill number 29. Alderwoman Spencer, are you ready to go on 29?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Ryan and members of the Public Safety Committee. I'd like to present you with Board Bill 29. I know we've had a lot of discussion about this. I'd like to start out with just a little bit of history and a little bit of background that might be sort of helpful here. Board Bill 29 is an ordinance, obviously, that would restrict the open carrying of firearms in the city of St. Louis. I know, many of us here, certainly across the city have been calling on our state to take action with regards to guns, large amount of violence in our neighborhoods throughout St. Louis. And typically the violence is at the hands of guns. And so, as we have been calling on our state legislature, recognizing that cities in the state of Missouri have been preempted from taking local action, I think it's been baked into our sort of collective consciousness that cities and municipalities in the state of Missouri can't do anything about guns, but there actually is something that we can do. What we can do under state law is to restrict the open carrying of firearms. Just to give a little background, cities, St. Louis and Kansas City, both had laws prohibiting the open carrying of firearms going back to the 70s. When the state of Missouri passed the preemption law in 2014, it invalidated those local ordinances. And At that time, Kansas City and many municipalities in the state of Missouri passed a local ordinance that did conform to that state law. Our local ordinance was invalidated because it didn't, because it had been passed beforehand, conform to state law. But those other cities did pass, conforming conforming local ordinances restricting the open carrying of firearms. And it never became legal there. And therefore you don't see the widespread open carrying of lethal weapons in those cities. St. Louis is a different case. We didn't take the opportunity to pass a local ordinance. And because of that, we are in a situation where the open carrying of firearms has become really commonplace and really, really dangerous. So let me walk you through how Board Bill 29 does conform to state law here. As I mentioned, the state statute which preempts cities is revised state statute 21750, and I'll read just a little bit from that. This, preempts the entire field of legislation touching in any way firearms, components, ammunition, and supplies, to the complete exclusion of any order, ordinance, or regulation by any political subdivision of the state. And it goes on to say no county, city, town, village, municipality, or other political subdivision of the state shall adopt any order, ordinance, or regulation concerning in any way the sale, purchase, delay, transfer ownership, use, keeping, possession, bearing, transportation, licensing, permit, registration, taxation, or other than sales and compensating use taxes or other controls on firearms, components, ammunition, and supplies, except as provided in subsection 3 of this section. And the reason I'm reading that is because we really are restricted here in cities from doing almost anything regarding gun laws. But it does outline that one exception. That exception reads, any person in any jurisdiction in which the open carrying of firearms is prohibited by ordinance, the open carrying of firearms shall not be prohibited in accordance to the following. And it goes on to say, a person with a valid concealed carry endorsement or permit shall be required to have that concealed carry endorsement from the state and be willing to show it to a law enforcement officer. So what this does is really identifies that cities can prohibit the open carrying of firearms except for folks who have a concealed carry permit. And I want to be very clear about that because the state law that we have come to know as our preemption law does provide this pathway or loophole, if you will, for cities to enact a local ordinance related to gun laws. Recognizing that many of us have been calling for the state to take action for a long time, I want to point out a couple things. The difference between a local ordinance and a state law. One benefit of having a state law, or excuse me, having a local ordinance versus having a state law is that we control the punishment, we control the policy, we control the rollout. And so there's a lot that we can really control in that way. It doesn't go on a person's permanent record, and we can really, we have additional controls here with regards to that. Number two, I want to point out that if we did have a state law versus a local law, it would be the same police department that would be enforcing it. So we have a little more flexibility and a little more control here in a local ordinance to really outline how we want to have this unrolled. As I mentioned, this bill really just narrowly conforms to the state law, by restricting the open carrying of firearms, and I thought it would be helpful to also outline a couple things that it does not do. It does not restrict the carrying of a concealed weapon. So if your weapon is concealed in a backpack or pocket even, this bill does nothing about that. It has to be openly carried to be able to have this be effective. And number two, it does not require or empower the police to enact with any member of the public who is not open carrying a firearm, who does not have that firearm displayed. So, what we're hoping to do with this is really unroll the situation in which we're in right now, where the open carrying of firearms has become commonplace. It is well known to everybody in the city that you can walk down the street with an AR-15 or a semi-automatic weapon, and the police department, no, we can do nothing about it. And it's a truly scary thing to see so many of our young people, our children, walking around in our communities. I happen to be, driving through downtown on 4th of July, and there were a lot of firearms that I saw and heard throughout our downtown area on that day. And I see them all the time in our communities. In fact, where I live in front of my house, it is not uncommon to see somebody with a semi-automatic weapon in the neighborhood that I live in. And it's truly terrifying to know that we can do nothing about it. So Board Bill 29 does restrict, again, just the open carrying of firearms for those who don't have a concealed carry permit. The concealed carry permit on the state of Missouri can be obtained for folks 19 and older. So what this would immediately do is eliminate open carrying of firearms by juveniles and children within our city. As a matter of business today, I have a committee substitute, which I have circulated to the committee. It does 4 things. We've done a lot of work on this bill since the introduction, and I want to commend the chairman here, as well as the vice chairman, and frankly, all the members of the committee for having one-on-one conversations and working to make this bill better. And certainly it is in a better place, and the city councilor for helping to identify some issues. So with that, the 4 things that the committee substitute does do, it changes, first of all, the language around the permit. It removes some language to make it more streamlined in case the state law changes in any way, and it just conforms and makes removes some unnecessary language describing the concealed carry permit. Number 2, it also changes the penalty from less than $500 or requiring a $500 minimum to making that less than $500, so no more than $500 fine for this ordinance violation. It also directs juveniles to our juvenile court system as opposed to going through municipal court, and kind of removes some other language with regards to the confiscation at conviction clause. And there's been some confusion around this particular amendment because it does not conviction clause does not restrict our police department from taking a weapon. It simply removes the conviction confiscation piece. So with that, with the permission of the chair, I'd like to put before us the committee substitute because it outlines those fixes, I would say, in the bill. And I'll also communicate, as I have done via email, that we have that one amendment to address as well. So deferring to the chair, I would like to maybe put the committee substitute before us so that we can discuss the bill in its corrected form.
Sure, I'll take a motion to put the committee sub in front of us. Anyone want to move on?
Yeah, I move to put committee sub in front of us.
All right, do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, so there's been motion from the Alderman from the 2nd and second from the Alderman from the 10th to put Board Bill 29 committee sub in front of the committee. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderwoman Keys.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velazquez.
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanye.
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge.
Aye.
Chair Narayan.
Aye.
We have 7 aye votes.
All right, Board Bill 29 committee sub is now properly in front of the committee. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd also like to now describe the amendment that includes 2 pieces here that we'll be discussing just before we go into questions or comment from the chief and from anybody else, simply because I think it may address some issues and put some of those concepts before us. So the amendment that we have, which is in our drive, what I want to just describe what that amendment does. It does essentially 2 things. The first is that it puts in some tracking language. I want to thank the president of the board, Megan Green, and her staff, in particular Janika, for really working to develop this tracking piece. I also like to thank Alderwoman from the 7th from really working to add some additional pieces in there. And speaking to the chief yesterday, I think the chief was open to tracking the deployment of Board Bill 29. And so I think it's important to not only keep track of what we're doing, but also make that information available to the public. The other thing that the amendment does do is, there's going to have to be a policy around how our police department interacts with folks as a result of Board Bill 29. And we'll also have to kind of outline the policy for taking the weapon and kind of how police officers are directed to interact with the public about it. By direction of our city attorney, we've included some language that will direct our police chief with consultation to the city attorney and to develop that policy. I also have confirmation from the chief that this would go through this kind of would go through the legal process and be vetted that way, and certainly be weighed in by the mayor. So with that, those are I've included everything in one amendment just to keep it all sort of clean. And I think that those are the pieces that would be included in the bill as I'm proposing today. And with that, I have a lot more to say about it, certainly, but I'd like to maybe answer questions as the committee has them, Mr. Chair, if you're ready for that.
Sure. So I guess before we dive into that, I do want to thank you as the sponsor of this bill, the members of the committee, the city councilor, and the police chief for all coming together. This was a heavy lift, and it's something that is unfortunately necessary in our city, and legislation like this isn't always easy, especially when you anticipate litigation surrounding it. So I want to thank you for continuing to work with me, the chief of police, the city councilor, and others to get this into a place where we believe that we have a fighting chance in a courtroom on it, that a judge is going to say, no, this is absolutely allowed under the Missouri State Constitution. And I think it's important not just to pass legislation that feels good, but also to pass legislation that is constitutional and will hold up in a court of law. And I believe that that's what we are going to be doing here with this piece of legislation. So I would ask to be added as a co-sponsor to it. With that, I will open it up to members of the committee. Alderman.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may, I think it would be actually really helpful to hear from the chief at this point before we do.
Sure.
Because the chief talked about the policy that he envisions and kind of, I think it'll answer some of the questions about like what will happen when an officer encounters or sees somebody openly carrying a firearm. And so the chief would be the best person, I think, to kind of describe that.
Sure. And Chief Tracy, if you're still on. All right. Great. Yeah. Chief Tracy, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Alderwoman Spencer, for sponsoring this bill. Overall, let's just put it this way: working in 3 other cities that had more restrictive gun laws than we have here, it's never good to have children carrying guns anywhere. And in this state, in this city, we have open carry, and I think that was very alarming to me coming in. And then it's something that I expressed down to the state, and I knew that I think even Senator Roberts was trying to put a bill in to try to match and make sure that the gun laws in this state matched at least the federal gun laws who prohibited juveniles from carrying firearms, similar to what we're trying to do here. But even in most restrictive states with carrying firearms, we still have firearm violence by juveniles and young adults. So this is just, I believe this is just another tool in an overall comprehensive plan to try to make our city safer. And I think if done right, we get this through, would certainly help us. And my concerns, and I spoke with the chairman of the Public Safety Committee and the chairwoman of the Budget Committee, who's sponsoring this bill. I had concerns from the operational piece. I had concerns of what authority this was going to give our police officers, what liabilities were in place, checking with city councilor and making sure we're in a good place for liability to our police officers. And then on top of that, more importantly, how can we do this as we approach a person with a deadly weapon and then make sure we keep all parties safe, everyone, sanctity of life. We don't want to make sure that these things get escalated. And I think one of the major things, and I'll get into some of the practices that I foresee that are already in our policy, because you don't really change policy, it's how you approach a person if you're going to issue a summons and or make an arrest. And also you start a preliminary investigation first off, and you try to go from there. But I think we got to make sure there's an educational piece. Should this go through, everybody should know that the law has changed. Open carry, unless you have a concealed carry permit as an adult, that's the only time you can carry, and you have to produce it when asked if you're going to open carry. So an education piece has to be put out on this to make sure, and also an education piece and an additional training piece internally with our law enforcement officers to understand this. Should this bill be passed, and then within the policy, we already have in our policy in the special orders 8.01, and actually specifically section 6 that goes to J, what actually also talks about ordinances and summonses, and how we should handle them and how we should approach people and how we should take care of that after possibly a summons or an arrest is made for violating this ordinance. And that's also in our policy. And then also our overall arrest booking and related procedures falls into this. And there's certain things on how we approach. We don't really have to change much because the good policy is about approaching people and making arrests, and especially in a violation and a summons that's summonsable in some areas and an arrest in others. And the compliance that needs to be involved by the understanding that this new ordinance is going to be put in place. And those are my concerns, and being able to approach someone. Actually, this ordinance is going to give the officers the authority to approach, question, and ask a person for their concealed carry if they're an adult, and obviously if they're juveniles, no, they don't. They're not going to have the concealed carry permit. But start from there, and then make sure that we can take some dangerous weapons off the street, issue summonses where appropriate, and if there's any additional activity, if there's any additional warrants or background checks that come about, we'll take the appropriate action by policy.
Well, thank you for that, Chief. And at this point, I will open it up to the committee for questions for the sponsor and for the chief, Alderman Oldenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going to make a brief statement. I want to commend the Alderwoman from the 8th on her consensus building. This was introduced weeks ago. She solicited feedback from the community. She engaged and rounded up every stakeholder. In no way is this piece of legislation rushed. So Alderwoman, I do want to commend you to soliciting feedback. You were even bullied on Twitter, quite frankly, over this piece of legislation. So I just really want to thank you as a model way to bring policing legislation and law enforcement and public safety. This is really a model legislation, and you should be commended, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Alderman. I'll say, on that front, I can't take full credit for that. I would have rushed this through, and I do commend my, the committee here for, really asking and demanding me to pause. And I think the resulting bill is better off that work, and I'm grateful for the workability of my colleagues to help get us in a better place. So thank you. And thank you. I mean, it's been a lot of work, and I'm really grateful to do it.
All right, we'll move to Alderman Clark Hubbard. Alderman Clark Hubbard. All right, we'll circle back on Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I do support this bill. However, I did send out an email response earlier today to talk about the role that parents play in the behavior of their young people. And on a regular basis, we are seeing parents being left out of the equation when it comes to monitoring, supervising our young people. A lot of the things that are happening in downtown St. Louis in the wee hours of the morning involving people who are well underage, whose parents should know where they are. So my concern is that how do we enjoin parents, let's say a young person, 13 years old, 14 years old, they're standing on the corner, whether they are 15, the police officer engages them. They naturally don't have the concealed carry permit, and the weapon is confiscated. They may be taken to the local juvenile facility, and knowing the capacity, I was a former tracker for juvenile offenders for 9 years. So we know that for every young person that they may engage, they really don't have a place to put them. But in remanding those young people back to their parents, what are the consequences for that young person, as well as for the parent? Again, we cannot continuously leave the parent out of this process. And so I would like to see at some point, and again, I don't want to rush this thing, but I think that there needs to be some language, some verbiage at some point that gives information on what the consequences could be, should be, for parents of young people who, in some ways, may not even be aware that their young person is standing on a street corner, carrying a high-powered rifle that may yet be stolen. So that's a discussion that I would like to see added to this as well.
Thank you, Alderwoman. From the 11th, I think that this is something, we talked about a little bit briefly earlier today, that that the board can look into in a general sense. It gets so complicated, especially when thinking about, kids who are homeless, or maybe are in foster care and don't have, there's just a lot of complicating factors here that I think we all are aware of in thinking through. I appreciate that your willingness to bring this up and to consider this over maybe over break, and if there's anything I can do to further that conversation.
You cut out there a little bit for me, at least at the end there, but
I did.
Yes, Alderwoman.
I just said if there's anything I can do to further that conversation, that work, please let me know.
Great. Anything further, Alderwoman Keys?
No, thank you so much. And I hope that the board understands my concern and will give it full consideration, because there needs to be some mechanism to really make parents a part of, like I said, a part of the equation. We cannot continue to leave them out.
Understood. And we'll circle back. I see Alderwoman Clark Hubbard now. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, excuse me. Do you have any questions for the sponsor, for Chief Tracy?
No, I actually don't have any additional questions. I would like to thank the sponsor again, Chief Tracy, for being on here. All of my constituency that has reached out to me on Board Bill 29 since day one. and my colleagues for being open to continuing these conversations and getting to this floor stuff this weekend when I was at the town hall that they had for youth at Harris Stowe. People brought this legislation up to me and gave me some thorough background on the different entities they had spoke with, the different ways they came to the conclusions to be able to really do this, because originally one of my biggest holdups in it was the confiscation piece. Because again, I knew the story of officers trying to do this and having their hands tied and that they couldn't. And I didn't want to give any kind of false hope, not just to us and to the board and to our police officers, but most importantly to the families that, again, have been hearing from daily about wanting anything, any kind of tool like this to be able to help support this moving forward. And when I say this, I'm not talking about this specific legislation, but the war on violence, the war on our babies being out on the street, the war on a lot of the things and the loopholes that we know sometimes hold us back from being able to do what's morally right, which we know at times you can't legislate, but we can put things in policy to give them the tools to do it. And knowing that the efforts that went in behind this and people saying that they really would use this, which I hadn't heard at first, but again, the ongoing conversations, not just from the sponsor, but from others that work on this legislation has helped. So again, my constituency base has been reaching out to me since day one. And so while I was torn on something, I'm now definitely in a better space with it. And I thank everybody that's put these efforts in again to get this not going to solve. We know it's not going to solve everything, but I'm big on having all the tools in the toolbox that people will really use and use responsibly to get to a space where we can reimagine or really see a pathway to public safety here in the city of St. Louis. So thank you again, and I'll be continue to listen to the rest of the comment.
Thank you for that. We'll move to Alderwoman Velasquez.
Hi, I just want to say one thank you to Chief Tracy for being for collaborating with the Alderwoman for the 8th, and thank you, Alderwoman Spencer, for your work on this. I do have, I guess, an amendment to the amendment, and I know that I briefly talked with Alderwoman Spencer and Alderwoman Saunier. I've also heard from my constituents about this, and I do want to kind of clarify, at least from my perspective, a little bit of miscommunication. I know that there's been a lot of questions about this being stop and frisk 2.0. The data overwhelmingly shows that police stops do, any kind of police stop does predominantly impact people of color. So I think it is important that in the tracking amendment that was proposed, that we do also track race and gender. Just again, I mean, we're in a city that is majority people of color. And I think, a lot of the gun violence that we're seeing also impacts some of these communities, and that we add that to the language. And I also know that this is, I don't think, I will speak for myself, but I don't think there's anybody on the board who wants to see more gun violence, right? So I'm grateful that we can take advantage of this loophole and also try to address in any way that we can gun violence, but that we also need to make sure that we're at least tracking what we're doing and why, just because the data up to this point does show that it affects these communities more in lots of ways. So however we propose, I propose that we add race and gender to the tracking part of this amendment moving forward.
All right, and do you have that? Is your proposal in the drive at this point?
It is not in the drive. I can send it to you after this meeting, but it would just be simply, I've seen the amendment to the tracking. It would be simply to add race and gender to what we track in those stops, but I can add that to the drive.
That's something that that you're, I guess, can you work with the sponsor of the bill on that? I do realize that you're out of town right now, but if you could work with the sponsor on that so that we could address that during perfection of this, because I don't know, this is one of the reasons Zoom is so frustrating.
I mean, Chairman, what I'm in reading the language right now, again, for the tracking, I think in the last section, we could say where it says provided, however, that the initial report shall contain information compiled, containing information, we could include the words right there, including race and gender. In
That would
that
be perfect.
piece, in the reporting. And I think we could, in theory, include that, in it right now.
Okay. I mean, if you want to make just an oral amendment, that's fine with me. We'll just have to make sure that the clerk takes note of that.
When we put the amendment, I will include that, including race and gender. I will make that change, that friendly amendment right now, and circulate it through the email. Okay.
Thank you, Alderwoman Spencer.
So we're
Thank you all
including the-
for working with
So-
my technological situation.
But just a quick point of order, Mr. Chairman, we're just going to, are we going to put a new committee substitute that has an edit in front of us, or are we going to amend the committee substitute?
It's an amendment to the committee substitute is what it sounds like to me. So it'll move to Board Bill 29, committee substitute as amended.
Understood.
Just for clarity, we have a committee substitute, and we already have the amendment. We have one amendment that includes those two pieces I discussed, the policy rollout.
Yes.
So we're just going to amend the amendment before the amendment gets to us. So we'll still just have the one amendment with this one little change.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to be clear. So we've already adopted to bring the committee to, we voted on that. So now we're getting ready to bring Board Bill 29 committee substitute as amended.
We
Yes.
have the committee substitute. We don't have the full amendment yet. And Ms. Higgs, I'll go ahead and include you on this email.
Okay,
I will send right now with the amendment with that small change in it.
thank you.
All right. With that, we'll move to Alderwoman Saunier.
Thank you, Chair. First, I just wanted to thank, really all of you for, we've had so many conversations. We've had several email chains, informally or formally. I think this was probably, of all the bills I've worked on since I've gotten elected here, is probably the most conversation and the most, the most changes. And so I just want to acknowledge all of my colleagues for showing up to the conversation, picking up the phone, responding to the message, being willing to meet and to make a lot of the changes that are in the bill as it is now. I think that's a part of a good culture and a healthy relationship amongst each other. So I want to thank all of my colleagues, including obviously the sponsor of the bill, for being open to those changes and actually making it a conversational piece. And then I wanted to kind of, I know earlier, for me, one of the downsides of this bill, and I know that we had time constraints and other things, but I don't really feel like we did enough public engagement around this bill. I know it's summertime. I know we wanted to get into it, but this is such a big change. And I know that, I had a great experience with public engagement for the first time on Budget Committee, because we went the extra mile of having the public meetings, of going into the community and having those meetings there. And I know we just heard Alderman Aldridge get asked, did you do this? Did you do that? And around, police transparency, but I don't, feel necessarily that same energy around this, of something that does, could potentially create dangers and could create risk. So for me, I feel like I really hope moving forward, we can make sure, if we're going to put things in place, that we give, I'm glad for everyone who has time to come and attend. And I think part of that is also because we're virtual, but I hope in the future we make time, if we're going to do big changes like this, that we know are not just limited to policy, that requires psychological and cultural changes, that we really put the extra work in to engage community and meet them where they are. And that's something that I don't think was done robustly enough in this part of it. I do also, I had a question for Chief Tracy, who's still on the call. I think similar, and I've gotten a lot more clarification on what you know, what it looks like around the gun piece. But I think for me, and most of the questions I've gotten from constituents have just been around, could you tell me some scenarios of this bill in place and how that would look? And I think Chief Tracy is the best one to speak to that. So I'm wondering if he's still on the call and if he can maybe just, I think for me, people are still, because in our first meeting, we had so much conversation around, you know, confiscation language and and all of that. So I'm just wondering if he can give some clarity around what this would look like in regards to that in practice.
Chief Tracy, could you weigh in there?
Absolutely, Chair. So, you know, I think we got to go back to what it looked like before the law was changed. And then you had to have concealed carry permit. It's open carry, and juveniles were not allowed to carry firearms. So we'll go back to that. How did we address that? How do we address individuals right now that we've made easily over 600 arrests in the city of St. Louis of people committing crimes and arresting them with a gun? So we're used to dealing with it. We're used to approaching individuals, doing field investigations, and making sure we try to keep everybody safe in those situations. With open carry, that's why I had asked that an educational piece be put out there, that this thing goes into effect, and to make sure that in the follow-up, I want everybody to know what the rules are, that who can carry, juveniles cannot carry, if this goes through. And then adults, you have to have a concealed carry permit, and it has to be produced upon request of a police officer. And that's within state law as I look at what's in the proposed bill. So we would approach it from asking juveniles. You would have to ensure that you know that they are juveniles. You would have to approach and ask, and then if it is a juvenile, they cannot be carrying the gun. And then we're to take the gun, to make sure we identify the individual. We will run the name. This is where you get back into the juvenile center, and the rules are different for juveniles and how the courts deal with that and diversion and the point system. We can go on, and we already have an MOU in place that was signed earlier this year between the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department and the juvenile courts. And there are a diversion piece, and I think that might hit with Alderwoman Keys as far as her concern when it comes to parents, because then they would have to come in and find out what we're doing if they're going to be released to the parents. What are the services from the Office of Violence Prevention and some of the diversion services that we're doing? It might hit that piece. I don't want to lose track of what's going on here. When it comes to adults, open carry, our officers can approach. They can ask, do you have a permit? By law, they have to produce that concealed carry. If you have a concealed carry, then they can have open carry. If they cannot produce it, we can, when confiscation piece, we can take hold of that firearm because they're not going to produce that they have a concealed carry, and therefore they're in violation of this ordinance. We will do the background check. We'll summons accordingly, but also do a background check to make sure that gun's not stolen, it's not defaced, it's not wanted for, he or she is not wanted for any other crimes, and just like all other arrest processing. So that's why I'm saying there's not a lot to change here, but but summonsable, if they're eligible for a summons, just like any ordinance that's in there, it's a non-traffic ordinance, we'll follow the general orders when we can release and when we can't, when we can issue the summonses. And that depends on the history of the person. If they don't have any wanted, they're not wanted for any other crimes, and therefore the crime of just carrying that gun, it's not stolen or defaced. I think that's just one scenario to go through as we approach individuals. First is to ask about, do you have a concealed carry permit?
Thank you. And do you believe that the 30 days that's in the bill right now is enough time for us to do the educational piece that you're referencing?
You know, I think I have to leave it up to you legislators. You know, what would be the piece to educate how you would get that out? I think it has to be a public. This is my personal opinion, and I think to make sure this goes okay, because it better educated the public, right to know, right? When we talked about this earlier, Alderwoman. And so what I would like to, when we look at these things, I'd like to make sure that it's out there. And then even within the policy, I think we already have a lot in the policy already. And really that covers this type of ordinance. And then if we have to make some specialty in it that with the city councilor feels or how we come to agreement, we certainly can do that, because it was something a couple of years ago that I looked at about resisting arrest that was actually put in as an order right after that, but it followed the same policy. Good policy can be tweaked a little bit specific to a law, but I don't want to change the whole policy for one law. You should stay within the same framework so the officers are working within the same constraints and rules.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Those are my questions for the chief. I'm just highlighting what I'm sure people in the public are thinking, that this bill has 30 days. Alderman Aldridge's transparency bill had 180 days, and we were still like, that some of us weren't on board with that being enough time. I guess the only other thing that I have is I do have an amendment to offer. I know right now and the amendment is in the drive, so you can find it, amendment number 3 to Board Bill 29, and also amendment number 4 to Board Bill 29. So right now the outcomes or the consequences of the bill are a $500 fine or a period of incarceration, depending on whether child or adult, the juvenile or adult. The language is a little different. My amendment adds community service as an option. Again, I'm thinking of what holistic public safety looks like. I'm thinking about what it looks like to make sure as we're putting things in place, we're not creating extra barriers for folks who may be impoverished. And I'm also specifically thinking of the youth that we have had many conversations about, who $500 is quite a bit and may not be affordable or accessible to them, and or also people who may deal with this, but spending time in jail might cause them to lose access to other opportunities. So my amendment offers that, it still will be up to, as it always is, the judge to make a call, but it adds community service as an option as well, if someone violates the ordinance.
So let me jump in here real quick. That puts us at 4 overall amendments to this.
No, if I may, so we have just we have the committee sub, which rolled in the first set of amendments. So those are not amendments. Then I have amendment 1, and actually the clerk, or excuse me, Lou Galley, our counsel for the board, sent me a better way to handle the tracking, or the race and gender tracking piece. I'm going to recirculate that. Thank you, Mr. Galley, for taking a look at that. And then Alderwoman Sonier's 2 amendments would then be amendment 2 and 3, because we don't have a second one. And I apologize for the number of changes and having some confusion around that.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Just trying to make sure that we get it done correctly, so that when we get it out of committee, that everything that is supposed to be in there is in there.
Sure. So I do have one question, Alderwoman Spencer, on your committee substitute as amended. I know you had 1 in the drive at first, and I know that you are making the change when adding the verbiage race and gender. Are we adding that to your first amendment, and are we substituting your first amendment out for the change for race and gender? If so, then we could do that as a swap. But if you're going to keep your first amendment and then make a change adding the verbiage gender and race, then that will be considered an amendment number 2.
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify this, Madam Clerk. I think what we can do, since we haven't officially viewed amendment or considered amendment number 1, we could swap it out at your with that suggestion. I'm going to send this now. Mr. Galley sent a revised version, which just kind of includes it in the pieces that are tracking the information rather than just the report. So I think it's a much better way of handling that. I'm going to circulate that to everyone, including you, Madam Clerk, and we can swap it out and have this be amendment number 1.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So I guess, do we have, we don't have that first amendment in the drive yet, then.
We do have it in everyone's email inbox as of right now.
Okay. So then at this point, I'll entertain a motion to.
If I may, just Mr. Chair, we haven't officially adopted amendment number 1.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to right now.
So, okay. And I don't know, have we gone through all the questions from the board? Do we want to go through the full set of questions and then handle amendments, or I don't want to overstep your.
We had just moved, I guess Aldridge, still need to get back to Aldridge, yep. Alderwoman, excuse me, Alderman Aldridge.
Brett, you do this. You starting to do this a little too often. I'm sorry.
You know, there's more Alderwoman than I'm used to right now.
Shout out to Alderwoman.
If I don't know if the Alderwoman from the 7th was done with her question, so I don't want to.
Oh, I apologize. I thought that she had finished her line of questioning. If not, you still have the floor, Alderwoman Sanye.
No, I think that completes my line of questioning, as long as, I'm very supportive of Alderwoman Vasquez Amendment 2. I think we need to include demographic data as well. And then I have the amendment I just brought. So that's it. And just thank you to Alderwoman Spencer and Alderwoman Vasquez and others who worked with me on the tracking language changes that were made.
All right, well then we'll move to Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I feel like I'm echoing a lot of what folks said. I do want to, as always do on budget committee, second everything the Alderwoman from the 7th and did my tag team partner, Daniela, Alderwoman Velasquez, also said, when this bill first came forward, I remember maybe members either on this committee or at the board thought that myself and Alderwoman Velasquez and Sonia was against the bill for political reasons, not taken into account. And I appreciate Alderwoman Spencer for actually sitting down with us of really trying to figure out how this would impact people that look like me or look like Alderwoman Velasquez or Alderwoman Sanye. What we did know after, looking at a lot of data, like Alderwoman Velasquez said, we know when there are stops between officers and people of color, those situations tend to be more deadly. And at the time in committee, I said, my fear is that this would be a stop and frisk. Luckily, the Alderwoman from the 8th Ward, did her work and got a legal opinion that this wouldn't necessarily be policy like stop and frisk. But even if it wasn't the policy, it was the vibes that was given off, especially living in the skin that we live in. While it may not be policy at times, we have been affected by things like this, where I think our concern, and mainly my concern being the only Black man down at this board, is how do we make sure that whatever policy that is passed, it does not affect the people that look like me in a deadly situation. And was even thinking about how would this ensure that law enforcement aren't put in a situation where in short terms we see a shootout, if people know what those terms are. But Alderwoman Spencer, I do want to commend you, because we had, since you brought this bill forward, me and you had some really intense conversations, if it's been over a cell phone, during text, even social media, about this, because you knew my concerns of, how this would affect people disproportionately of color, especially what we've seen from recent videos and tweets and Facebook have been mainly, people of color carrying guns, and kind of that outcry of why we need to do something around this bill. And the ones that are not doing nothing are trying to hold up progress or political. And it wasn't that. It was truly, how do we make sure that we save more lives than potentially hurt lives in the process of doing it? So I do appreciate you, Alderwoman Spencer, for trying to get this to a spot, especially for your members of color that serve with you and that are on this committee, to make it a little bit more palatable, by adding the tracking so that we actually can track who's being pulled over. Putting some safeguards. I'm sure we will accept Alderwoman Sonier's amendment. Instead of just incarcerating people, how do we ensure that there is second chances? And looking forward to hopefully Alderwoman Keys, if she has language, but also bringing up, what is the role that parents take, and you being willing to work around that. So I have no more questions. I know the Alderwoman from the 7th Ward wants to bring an amendment forward. So I will yield for now and make any more comments later on in the meeting.
All right, thank you. At this point, I think we should take up the 3 amendments, and then we'll take public testimony, and then we'll take a vote on this. So I'll entertain a motion to take up Amendment 1 to Board Bill 29 Committee Sub.
So move.
Just for clarity, with the friendly amendment, with the friendly change to the amendment.
Yes. So it's been moved by the Alderman from the 14th. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, moved by the Alderman from the 14th, seconded by the Alderman of the 7th, that we adopt amendment number 1 to Board Bill 29 Committee Sub. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderman Oldenburg,
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Keys,
Aye.
Alderwoman Velazquez,
Aye.
Alderwoman Sonier,
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge,
Aye.
Chair Narayan.
Aye.
We have 7 aye votes.
With that, we have successfully adopted Amendment 1 to Committee Substitute, or Board Bill 29 Committee Substitute. At this point, I will entertain a motion to hear Amendment 2 to Board Bill 29 Committee Substitute as amended.
So moved.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just for clarity, so in the drive, there's one document that has amendment number 2, amendment number 3, and amendment number 4. The amendment number 2 is to remove the make sure that juveniles are adjudicated in the juvenile courts. And I just wanted clarity if that's what we're discussing, or if we're discussing the other issues, because I'll maybe offer some clarity on that if it's helpful.
Let me refresh my drive real quick and make sure that we're looking at the same.
If the Alderwoman from the 7th wanted to clarify maybe which one.
So I only mentioned the community service one because you and I spoke earlier about the juvenile piece, so that's why I didn't bring it up, because I'm not bringing that amendment forward.
I thought that was maybe the case, Alderwoman. So, but it's labeled as amendment number 2 in the drive. So I think actually, I didn't realize that that's how it was in the drive. So maybe we, I'll defer to Madam Clerk on this, but can we consider amendment, what's identified as amendment number 3 as the second amendment to the bill?
Give me one moment so we can just make that quick change in the drive or with the clerk. Give me one moment, please.
Sure thing, we'll hold tight.
And is it that Alderwoman Velazquez's her amendment for adding race and gender doesn't need a number because it's a friendly amendment?
We swapped out, we made the
Swapped out.
Okay, just making sure.
So for members of the public, the juvenile folks that are arrested, that are in violation of this ordinance, that are juveniles, will be handled through our juvenile court system.
Thank you for your patience. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and call the amendment that Sonia is bringing forward now, amendment number 2, and we'll just change it in the drive.
Okay. All right, so there was a motion on the floor, I believe, was it Sonia who moved to adopt amendment number 2?
And amendment number 2 is speaking, amendment number 2 originally in the drive is number 3?
Number 3.
No, it's number 4. It's speaking about the community service.
It's both. There's 2 parts to the amendment, because amendment number 3 addresses it for juveniles, and I think amendment number 4 addressed it for adults.
Okay.
So community service to both of those sections.
Okay, so we're going to have an amendment number 2 and an amendment number 3 for you, correct? All right, thank you.
All right, so it's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 7th to adopt amendment number 2. Do I hear a second? All right, and so we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll, and I'll request previous roll.
I am so sorry, but it was going in and out from my end, so I'm not sure who made this, who was second and who made the motion. Couldn't hear.
Sonia made the motion, Velazquez seconded it. And there's been a request for previous roll.
Okay.
Hearing no objection, we've adopted amendment number 2. So now I'll entertain a motion to adopt amendment number 3 to Board Bill 29 Committee Sub as amended.
So move.
All right, it's been moved by the Alderman.
Second.
Second from the Alderwoman from the 6th. And Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll, and I'll request previous roll. Hearing no objection. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did you say call the roll?
Yeah, but I requested previous roll, and I don't hear any objection to previous roll. So we'll have adopted amendments 1, 2, and 3 to Board Bill 29 Committee Sub. And now we will open it up to public testimony. So I'm looking. Do we have anyone? Looks like Mr. T-Dub-O has his hand up. I don't see anyone else with their hand up at this time. Can we get Mr. T-Dub-O moved back over so he can testify?
It looks like it's T-Dub, Cohn, and Arnaz who hands are up, Mr. Chair.
All right, then.
Peace, everybody.
And if we could also get Ms. Cole and Ms. Bordeaux moved over. And Mr. T-Dub-O, could you raise your right hand to swear in again, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
I do.
All right, you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay. Again, born and raised North City, St. Louis, indoctrinated into a lot of the street culture that has plagued our city since the course of the 70s. In plain actuality, I'm a little disappointed. This is kind of like a Band-Aid over a bullet wound and a lazy approach. It was interesting to hear the Alderman of the 2nd Ward say this didn't feel rushed. To me, it does. It feels lazy and not creative at all. It shows the disconnect between elected politicians and the culture of the constituents that walk the everyday streets of St. Louis. The first thing is this is about creating a deterrent to violence or boosting arrest numbers. Because if we're talking about murders, someone who's going to go commit murder or assault with a gun, they don't care if it's a legal firearm, which 99% of them are legal. So it really doesn't matter what type of laws are established. And they don't care if there's a law established saying that murder is illegal because it's already illegal. As it is illegal for anybody under a certain age to purchase or carry a firearm. So the chief was talking about redundancy. To me, this is redundant. 3, predatory policing is a festering problem here statistically. An unarmed Black man here has 10 times the chance of being murdered by a police officer than anybody being killed by anyone else nationwide. Those are stats. Mike Brown, Vondera Myers, Kajin Powell. After that, 14 others in the span of a year and a half. Vondera Myers was shot down because he was carrying a sandwich that looked like a firearm. So what's going to happen when our police officers come in contact with someone who's actually carrying a firearm? We got record of that. It's called Philando Castile. We've seen how dangerous it can become, opening the door to limiting and removing constitutional rights. Roe versus Wade. That's neither here nor there. Illinois, New York, LA. Black communities with the strictest gun laws in the country, but murder persists, especially in Chicago, with strong gun laws and mandatory sentencing. The disconnect here and not understanding that this has become part of the culture with the youth and laws won't prevent someone who wants to break the law, that's the problem. And seeing that we only had not even 30,000 people to participate in this last aldermanic race election, I can understand the disconnect with the constituencies and the elected officials because you all aren't actually doing the work that Alderwoman Saunier was talking about, the extra work to get out here and actually speak with the community, to understand the culture. I can look at everybody on this call and tell that you don't come from the streets, you've never had a street interaction. Most of you all probably never been arrested or placed in handcuffs before, besides Rasheen and Alicia, and that's because I know them personally and have been arrested with them in Ferguson. Alderwoman Keys, I'm extremely disappointed in her stand because she comes from one of the most dangerous wards in the city, and she spoke about what's going on downtown. This is what this is about, the precious downtown area, when Black children, men, women, so on and so forth are being murdered and shot every day due to these systemic oppression situations, due to the lack of resources, due to the lack of opportunities, and nothing is being spoken about that. Downtown is the focus. Ms. Keys had the opportunity to be involved in a youth program that we've been doing over the course of the last decade, where we've established 4 different gang trees, and she stopped answering the phone. So again, I ask you all, is this about boosting arrest numbers, or this about actually saving lives? Because having a law in place to where it limits your constitutional right of opening and carrying, something that I was arrested for, my studio kicked in for, and the St. Louis American wrote about, and IA did nothing about. That's not going to limit murder or assault in this city until we talk about the real root causes of these situations. Thank you.
Can't hear you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr.
If I may have a rebuttal to that. Number one, I do answer my phone and I return all calls the same day. Additionally,
I could send the screenshots right now if I need to.
Please do so. But in any case, I have talked to you personally on several occasions. Now, when I talked about downtown, I simply was using that as an example of how we had young people and who were unsupervised in the wee hours of the morning. Let's talk about Ferguson. I have over 3,000 photographs that I personally took myself because I was in Ferguson every day. No, the only news outlet that carried that I was there was CNN. And I did a quick interview with them during the Mike Brown protest phase at Ground Zero. So, you know, it really is concerning that you don't know my history. I'm from the hood. I'm from Aldine and Grand. And on Aldine and Grand, which was one of the most heavily laden, drug-infested communities that there were during the time in the 70s and 80s that I grew up there. And we regularly experience gun violence. No, I have not lived a privileged life, so don't make that assumption about me. You know, ask the question about where I come from.
I wasn't assuming, but living in the streets and being from the streets, two different things.
Let me finish. You know, I am in this community. I work in this community. I'm well aware of what happens in this community. I'm in the streets every single day, and I am responsive to my community every single day. So I don't take it lightly that anybody would come to any venue and downplay my involvement or participation in my community.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. T-Dubbo?
I don't have any questions for him. I just, you know, I just want him to know that I understand what he's saying. Like I get where he's coming from. And I mean, I feel like because I'm here and I'm in this seat, I think for me, being in my position and being here, especially like as a young Black woman, is so interesting because I definitely know what it's like to be in a situation with no titles, with no power, with no access, and to be targeted and to be at risk and to feel like, you know, as elected officials, we have certain privileges and certain access that, you know, at the end of the day, our constituents don't, but that's why they put us here. So I just want to let him know, like, I understand what you're saying about the disconnect between elected officials and what it's like to move through as an everyday person, and that, you know, I'm really hoping that I can work with my colleagues and whoever else about a lot of the educational work that needs to be done, and that, you know, we I think we're doing some things to get community engagement, you know, to do it at the level of which our community deserves, and trying to put some of those things in place. I just wanted to, I think it's important, especially because I know not just him speaking, but other people watching this, I just want them to know, like, I hear you and I understand. And I would venture to say that I think my colleagues do. We've had a lot of conversations about this, and that you can't legislate culture, that you can't legislate societal change. And so I just wanted to just speak up and say, like, I understand.
All right, thank you for that, Alderwoman Sanier. Looks like Alderwoman Velasquez has something.
I just want to echo Alderwoman Sanier. I mean, we've had conversations, and I think your point about legislating culture is hard, and I'm not sure that this is the one thing that does it. I think what we've seen over and over again was, I don't just want to say studies to your experience, right? Because that wouldn't be fair. What we've seen is that, you know, what we really need to do is have consistent investment in communities, right? For these, and why this bill may be a sliver of that. What we really need to do, and what I'm committed to doing and working with my other alders, is doing that, because that is the long-term solution. But I do want to say, I hear you as well. And I do think it's important that we don't pretend that this is going to fix it all, because it's not. And that we have some real work to do in our community in St. Louis to fix things. And so I just also want to thank you for being here and being here for this whole meeting, and commenting both at the beginning and during this process.
All right, Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. You know, I want to say, I do know T-Dub personally, and he comes from the trenches. And I also, believe that Alderwoman Keys come from the trenches. And, I could say the same about also Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. And I'm in between a lot of, what, as I call them, Dub was saying, is how do we really get to like the root cause of the issue? Like when we pass legislation, like I said earlier, when we pass legislation, we're hoping that the intent of the legislation would do good. But we also have to think of just this past weekend, which, I know Alderwoman Clark Hubbard was there. I was there. There was a forum in North St. Louis where young organizations, and a lot of organizations was folks of color that's doing the work in the community, trying to bring everybody together to feel like, what can we do to actually address the root cause? We all play a role. We play a role as politicians, but you have people on the ground that are also trying to also scream and shout and say, why this legislation, we need to act, but how do we do more? And, how do we ensure that we are getting guns off the street? How do we also ensure that people have their rights and transparency? Going back to the previous bill that we just talked about, how do we move so quick by sending a message to the general public that we're willing to enforce, but we have hesitations on transparency, or we're not talking about the resource element. Like we're forgetting, I think. Well, I wouldn't say we, because I think, some wards are affected by this a lot more. Some wards are a lot more privileged than other wards. Why gun violence do impact us all, because we see it on Twitter. Some of us actually live it in our community compared to others. So I really do feel and understand the, while we play a legislative role, let's not actually forget the people in the streets that are doing the work. And I know a lot of us, all the people on this call, have lived in those trenches and continue to live in those trenches, and ready to work with who and everybody to make sure that we actually get legislation that really gets to the heart of the people in the community, and not just what is kind of sometimes kind of come out of reaction of what we've seen. So appreciate Dub's comment.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything for Mr. T-Dub? All right. Well, thank you, sir, for your comments both earlier and just now on Board Bill 82 and 29. And I will let's see, Ms. Bordeaux, if you could raise your right hand to be sworn in again.
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give will be true to the best of your ability?
Yes.
All right. You have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you. I just want to remind this committee that St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department kills more people per capita than any other police department. in the entire country. We have more police per capita, like T-Dub said earlier, than New York City. We have more police per capita than New York City. So that, and the SLMPD is so racist that there is literally a separate union for the Black police officers. So what do you think is going to happen when you send the cops into majority, predominantly Black neighborhoods to try to question people about why they have a gun? I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. A Black person is going to die. Another Black person is going to be killed by SLMPD. And then the police officer is going to say, oh, well, I feared for my life. And there will be no accountability behind that. And I know this is going to happen because SLMPD is going to enforce this law, if you all pass it, in two places. One, predominantly Black neighborhoods where Black people are already being surveilled and over-policed and harassed. The other place it's going to be enacted is downtown. This part of the bill is pandering to a very specific demographic that only comes into downtown for, you know, Cardinals games and Blues games and don't otherwise cross the bridge. I think that is, a big piece that nobody is saying out loud, but it's okay. I'm going to go ahead and say it. If you are talking about addressing gun violence and addressing crime, and you are doing nothing to address poverty, you are doing it wrong. You are skipping steps, which is why we keep failing. I don't want any of you to have the impression that I don't think we have a gun violence problem. We do. I don't even really have a problem with making St. Louis like a place where we just don't walk around with guns. I don't even have a problem with that. I have a problem with the way that this is going to be enforced and the fact that this board continues to skip steps. That's why we haven't gotten anywhere in St. Louis. You cannot address crime until you address poverty, right? I watched every single budget hearing. When we had public hearings, I watched all of them if I wasn't at them. I watched every single budget and public employees meeting. There were plenty of opportunities for you all to reallocate some budget money to help deal with the poverty problem that we have in St. Louis. Nobody did anything. Nobody said anything. Instead, I watched you all argue for an hour about cutting vacant positions or cutting positions from the Board of Aldermen. Nobody said anything about, hey, let's do something about poverty. Hey, let's do something about people don't have homes. Hey, let's do something about the fact that people don't have access to food or affordable childcare. I didn't hear anybody say, hey, let's expand the universal basic income pilot program to include double the amount of families, and let's extend it to 3 years instead of 18 months. If you all were serious about addressing crime in St. Louis, you would be focusing on poverty. So that really tells me everything I need to know.
You're at your time here.
I'm sorry, Brett, I'm sorry, Alder, give me just one more second. I'm going to respectfully ask that you all postpone voting this out of committee because there was no community engagement work done around this. And you know how I know? It's because I'm the chair of the People's Plan policy table, where 60 organizations who do social justice work, poverty work, violence prevention work, restorative justice work, I'm the chair of that table. And if there was any public outreach around, hey, let's have community-driven solutions to deal with gun violence, to deal with poverty, to deal with so on and so forth, I would have known. I would have been there right in the meeting. I would have been the one writing the agenda. So none of those things were done. So I want this to be successful. I want gun violence to go away in St. Louis, but we have to do it the right way, and we have to stop skipping steps. So there's no rush on this. You don't have to vote it out of committee today. Let's talk about community engagement. Let's go to the people and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. How do you feel about it? What other ideas do you have? That is how we co-govern in St. Louis. That is how we build trust, not only with the police department, as if that could actually be a thing, but also with our elected officials. So respectfully, don't rush this through. Get community engagement, get community ideas, and also stop skipping steps. Address the poverty that our constituents are dealing with. Thank you.
Give you an additional minute. So let's see, who else do we have here? Well, I should say first, does anyone have any questions for Ms. Bordeaux? All right, hearing none, I'm gonna look back at the screen. So we have Ms. Cole. Ms. Cole, if you could please raise your right hand and swear in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
I affirm.
All right. You have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
I'm truly tired. You know, we keep on going around the park about gun safety and community engagement. You know, I keep hearing people talking about Mike Brown and the Ferguson Commission. My family has been inundated with nothing but violence when we didn't even promote it. Mike Brown was a cousin of mine. And so when you start talking about all this stuff, it's ridiculous to me at times. You want to talk about, let's go back to community engagement. Well, what was the Ferguson Commission report for? That was one of them things you can look at, is that commission. Also, when you talk about property, yes, we have a problem with property, but the Bible said that you're going to have it all the time, but it is poor. You know, I've been in the community, and not only have I been in the community, I also work with homicide victims. So when you go talking about victims and gun violence, we already up to more than 90 people that has gotten murdered within St. Louis City, and not even talking about St. Louis County. So if we look at anything, we need to look at accountability for when we are having accountability for our parents. You know, like one thing Alderman Keys has said, you know, where I didn't even see it in that round table that the mayor put out about inviting the parents to be a part of that committee. So we need to look at that. The root cause is stop making excuses for bad behavior. You cannot legislate bad behavior. You got to deal with bad behavior. And we have young parents, and so you have to teach them when things are going. The other thing, I looked at community service. I said, okay, but without education, instead of putting community service, won't you make the people that you pick up deal with maybe sit in front of some of those families that has been affected by gun violence? You know, instead of community service, to pick up trash, to pick up this. No, you need to hear my story, that how your actions affected me. I believe that's it, because you already heard from my son. You know, you heard from the pain that is affecting my daughter, myself, his daughter, that he will be able. Never AR-15. I must apologize to Alderman Aldridge, because I thought I was talking about that bill at that time. But this is the bill I'm really concerned about, because what you're talking about on that other bill is already on tickets. It's already on a badge. It's already with IA already dealing with it. So when you deal with this, Ms. Cole,
if you could just finish your thought.
No, I'm through. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. All right. I am not seeing anyone else with their hand up? Okay, so at this point,
If I can just have one comment.
yes, ma'am. Please proceed.
You know, I heard what Ms. Bordeaux said about no one's addressing poverty. Well, I address poverty on the level in terms of senior citizens who are experiencing poverty too. We keep talking about it as if people who have aged out of the workforce don't experience poverty. I had submitted a board bill to try to help that. 18 months to able-bodied people, but nothing to people who paid into the system. So, you know, when we start talking about who should be able to get help, we should not have that discrimination, that ageism, sexual orientation, or any barrier. Poverty is poverty. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what age you are. Doesn't matter, you know, what race you are. You know, and we've got to stop having those type conversations that are exclusively favoring or pandering to a certain demographic. We're one city. We need to act like we're one city. We need to advocate for one city. And here we are, you know, still having these same types of discriminatory conversations around poverty and the issues that affect stakeholders. You know, the average senior citizen is a homeowner. They paid some dues into this system and they deserve some consideration. But we keep pandering to people who are here. And in most cases, they're still being supported by mama, grandmama, your auntie, uncle, okay? And so I want to make sure that I'm making it clear. Let's stop talking about poverty as if it's only one demographic.
Can I jump in there?
Absolutely. Please proceed.
And I do gotta give flowers to Alderwoman Keys. I knew she had that bill for seniors. I hope, you know, she worked to figure out the funding of it. But I you know, I want to, just to be clear on Arnez's comments, because she was talking about the budget committee, and I know we kind of getting off topic here, but Alderwoman Spencer did really give us an opportunity to dive into the budget and figure out ways that, you know, we could have asked departments more. And I think Ms. Bordeaux is correct. We could have done more. And for the ones who actually showed up to committee and was like actually invested in it on a day-to-day basis, you know, we could have, it to the ability of where we could on the budget and not making any excuses. You know, you bringing up ideas now that I wish I would have had to be able to bring forward. I know we tried to do some around the policing originally and had that conversation, but then to bring the amendment forward. But I do want to be, I think, clear in what Ms. Bordeaux was saying was more around the budget, as she was watching, like she said, those public budget, public safety hearings and what could have been done in that aspect. And I think kind of where her comments was being tailored around.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything that, as it relates to Board Bill 29, committee sub as amended?
Response, but I don't know. It's not about Board Bill 29. It was a response. You know, I just wanted to say to Alderwoman Keys, you know, that I think for me, that's one of the most memorable parts of being on the Board of Aldermen is seeing a room full of, you know, senior citizens who were excited and who were engaged. And I really appreciated you know, advocating for them. One of the things that I know has been a common word amongst us is divisive. And what I hope for all of us and for the city is like, one of the things that did break my heart in that meeting is I did hear, you know, there were people who attended that meeting and they said, honestly things that were nasty and disrespectful about young people and put them all in one kind of category. And one thing about me, and I hope you've experienced me this way, Alderwoman Keys, I have a deep, revered respect for all of my elders. And one thing that I really believe is like, it's not like young people versus elders. It's at the end of the day, all the folks in our community are going to thrive, or we're going to continue to see the results of what happens when people are left out and they're struggling, whether that be elders or whether that be young people. And one of the things that I know too, because the pilot program goes to the school district, there are so many families where the caretaker is not a mom, it's not a dad.
Alderwoman, could you please keep your comments on Board Bill 29, or else I fear that we're going to be here indefinitely.
Respond to that and say, like, you know, we can work together in the future. I really meant what I said, to figure out what we can do to support our seniors.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything as it relates to Board Bill 29?
Brett, I'll just, if you want, I'll go, or excuse me, Alderman, Mr. Chair, I am so sorry.
It's fine. At this point, hearing no one else, I'll recognize the Alderman from the 8th on close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Public Safety Committee. I want to just say, I agree, this is not going to solve gun violence. This is a tool, a tiny tool in the tool belt. You know, again, we all have continued to ask Jeff City to take action, and they have failed us. Our state has failed us on guns, on serving homeless folks, on funding, on our roads, on any number of things. Our state continues to fail us, on helping us with our 911 system, so many things. But this is one narrow window we can take action. When I first presented this bill over a month and a half ago, you know, my colleagues here in this committee stopped me and said, hey, listen, we need to talk about this and we need to do this in a better way. And I have to, you know, say that I wanted to make this move faster. And I have to give credit to all of you, the chair, the vice chair, Alderman Aldridge, Alderwoman Saunier, Alderwoman Velasquez for, and Alderwoman Clark-Hubbard for taking the time to make this a better bill. I know it's not perfect. There's no perfect solution. Inez is right. We have to address poverty, and I want to be present for that as well. And Inez, if you're still on, you know, you have my commitment to come to any meeting. I would love to engage. We are going to have a rollout period. The chief has to put forward a policy, and we have some time to do some education around this. I am grateful for the conversations as we've continued. I want to give particular thanks to the chief and the city attorney for weighing in, the president of the board, the members of this committee, of course. And I want to give a shout out to Joe Taylor, who is a volunteer lawyer in our community who gave countless hours to writing and just amending and working through so many issues here on this board bill. So, you know, I think this, again, this is not perfect, but, you know, I just really want to commend everybody here for working to make it as good as it can be through the narrow window through which a city can take action under our current laws. And with that, I ask for your the committee's favorable consideration on Board Bill 29.
All right, at this point, I'll entertain a motion regarding Board Bill 29.
Is this Board Bill 29 committee substitute?
Board Bill 29 committee substitute as amended. Yes, ma'am.
So move.
Is that with a due pass recommendation, Alderwoman Clark-Hubbard?
Absolutely.
All right. So I hear it's been moved by the Alderman from the 10th to pass this out with a due pass recommendation. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right. It's been moved by the Alderman from the 10th, seconded by the Alderman from the 2nd. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark-Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderwoman Keys.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Aye.
Alderwoman Saunier.
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge.
Aye.
Chair Narayan.
Aye.
We have 7 aye votes.
With that, we have passed Board Bill 29 committee sub as amended to the full board with a due pass recommendation. Thank you for your work on this, everyone. And Let's look where we're at on the agenda now. Sorry, I have to deal with this drive to get back into the agenda.
We have no resolution, so we're moving on to committee discussion, which is item number 1, Prop S funds.
And we will dispense with line item number 1. Do we have any written testimony?
One moment, let me see if we had any in the drive. Yes, we have one written testimony that is in support from a Ted Manchingale.
All right. Any members can go ahead and read that in the drive. At the moment, I'll pause for just a second here. Are there any announcements?
There are none.
Do we have any excused members?
Everyone was present.
All right, then at this point, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Did you want to read were we reading the testimony or not?
I think members can go into the drive and read.
All right.
So motion to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
Second.
And all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you all.